Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to have all of you to attend today's conference on European and German experiences and their implications for the cross-strait relations. Firstly, I want to say that this conference is actually supported by the German Research Foundation in cooperation with me, myself, and my partner, Felix Kronbein. We both got a support from the German Research Foundation, and they give us the lion's share of the whole costs, whole expenses of this conference. This is my first point. I want to express my sincere gratitude to the German side. And secondly, as you see, you can see that we have 3 guests from Germany, and they flew directly over the continent to Taiwan, and Confucius once said it's a great pleasure to have friends from afar. And also, my sincere gratitude for 3 of you from Germany to attend this today's event. And also, my sincere gratitude to our President of National Chengchi University, to give us the greeting remarks. It is a very, very rare opportunity that our President has come here and try to greet us. So may I present you the President of the National Chengchi University, Professor Dr. Zhou Xingyi, please.
Professor Tang and the distinguished scholars here with us this morning. Good morning, right?
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay. Good morning. I'm very pleased to be invited to greet all of you to this. I think this small forum here, and I'm also very happy to see many friends here because although Taiwan is very small, you don't get to meet with your friends often. Okay. And when I was told that Professor Tang is going to hold this forum, I was very, very pleased because I know that the theme of this forum is very important to Taiwan. As you know that Taiwan and mainland China right now has a very difficult relationship, and that difficult relationship has become a major uncertainty for people across the straits, especially for people in Taiwan. And uncertainty is bad. Nobody likes uncertainty. Okay, and uncertainty keeps business from being willing to invest. Okay, keep people, moving. Right? They probably don't want to stay in Taiwan because of uncertainty. So I think the most important issue of Taiwanese government is to figure out a good way to maintain a good and stable relationship, with mainland China. If we could do that, then we can reduce uncertainty. Right? But somehow, I'm not a scholar in political science, and I teach business and economics. But somehow it seems to me that we haven't figured out a way to do that yet, which presents some risks for people in Taiwan. And I know that European countries, in particular Germany, has many good experience in the past. that can be reference for us when we try to figure out a strategy, a way to have a stable relationship with mainland China. And I'm also very happy to know that there are many distinguished German scholars here with us to share with us. So I believe that your discussion today will be a very good reference for people in Taiwan in terms of what we can do to maintain a stable relationship with mainland China. And so I would like to wish you all success, and I certainly hope that if this is your first time in Taipei, the campus of National Cheng University is about 5 minutes from here by car. And then, I hope that Professor Tang will then take you to have a walk on campus. I think you will enjoy that. And also, if you're not, if this is your first time in Taiwan, you probably should visit Palace Museum too. It's a wonderful place to be. Okay, and I hope that you'll come back often so we can learn from you. And then each time you come back, okay, the relation between Taiwan and mainland China has become more stable. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, President Zhou Xingyi. I think my partner, I just want to introduce to you, Frederick Combine. He's one of the research fellow of the SWP. SWP is the most distinguished think tank in Germany on international politics. It serves to the, so to say, the Chancellor office. So it's the, I can say, one of the top think tanks in not only in Germany but also in Europe. Maybe I think Mr. Kumbay, Frederick, you want to say something to our audience before we invite our keynote speaker to make a speech. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm also very pleased to welcome you all on behalf of the German side to this conference with the title European and German Experiences and the Implications for Cross-Strait Relations. And this conference, as Professor Tang already mentioned, is part of a broader research project that Professor Tang and I are conducting together. And this research project will analyze how and if historical experiences from the relationship between the two German states, but also from the process of European integration, can be transferred to cross-strait relations. So this is the objective of this research project. And in this project we have two conferences. The first conference will be held today, and the second conference will be held in Berlin in July of this year. And the second workshop will mainly invite European studies scholars from Germany to discuss the process of European integration and how this process of European integration can be transferred to cross-strait relations, or if it can be transferred at all to this, to cross-strait relations. And in today's workshops, we will start with the keynote speech about domestic competition and cross-strait relations. And then we will have 4 sessions in the program. The first session we will start with the broader context of cross-strait relations, as for example the 19th Party Congress, and also China's foreign policy ambitions. And then in the second session we will analyze the current developments in cross-strait relations. In the third session we will then assess how mainland China has an impact on Taiwan. And here in the third session, unfortunately, Jens Tam was supposed to speak about same-sex marriage and the influence of same-sex marriage in Taiwan on mainland China is unfortunately sick. So in this session, instead of him, I will speak about my topic, which was supposed to be in the fourth session. So we have a slightly change of program here. And then the fourth and final session, we will look at the European experiences and how European experiences could be applied to cross-strait relations, and also Kant's eternal peace, perpetual peace idea or conception. Good, and last but not least, I also want to express my sincere gratitude to you for the organization of this conference, for this collaboration we have together, and of course also to the German Research Foundation, but also to the other supporters of this conference, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of China, the Taipei Forum Foundation, and Yuancheng Enterprises. So we are all very grateful for the support to this conference. And yes, and I also would like to, of course, to thank you all for coming here today to participate at this workshop, to speak here, and to participate in our discussion. So thank you very much.
Now, I will say this is the highlight of today's conference. We have invited Professor Wu Yusan. Professor Wu Yusan, I think all of us know him, and he got his PhD from UC Berkeley in the 90s, and since then he teaches in political science in the National Taiwan University, and since 2016 he was elected academician from the Academia Sinica. And as I read his CV, only the CV of himself, the titles that he got, it makes about two pages. And even more, that his publication covers all the fields of political science, from theory to comparative politics to international relations and so on. So all put together, his publication has about 30 pages, only the title of his publication. So if we put all together, all his publication can make up a kind of lexicon of political science. So I would say he's not only the primus inter pares, but the guru of this political science in Taiwan. So now, may we welcome Professor and academician Wu Yusan to give us his keynote speech. His topic will be domestic political competition and cross-strait relations. Please, Professor Wu.
Dear Professor Tang, distinguished guests from Germany, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to be able to do the keynote speech for this very important forum. And thank you very much for Professor Tang for giving me such flattering remarks. I'm very much interested in cross-strait relations. I think probably all political scientists in Taiwan are interested in this topic because it has existential importance for Taiwan. Today I'm going to talk about the political competition and cross-strait relations using an integrated approach. It seems that some of the diagram may not appear properly on the screen, but let me give it a try. Okay. When we talk about cross-strait relations, typically we would concentrate on the details and policies and so on and so forth. For example, Xi Jinping has just scrapped the term limits. And so everyone is expecting that he will serve for more than 2 terms as the supreme leader of the PRC. What would be the implications of cross-strait relations? We can do a lot of guessing, but I think a more useful way would be to come up with some theoretical understanding of the relationship between domestic political succession and foreign policy and cross-strait policy posturing of the PRC leaders. So we have to take a theoretical approach and analyze the data from the past in order to gain insight into what might happen in the future. And this is exactly what I would like to do. So let me first introduce you some of the cross-strait relations theories. We can talk about 3 theoretical dimensions in CSR, means cross-strait relations studies. The first one is cross-strait interaction. We have divided nation model, which I think is emphasized in this forum. Namely, we can compare the situation between Taiwan and mainland China to 2 Germans, 2 Koreas, and so on and so forth. And integrated theory, which I think is also very relevant in this forum, because the most prominent case will be the European Union. The third one is power symmetry paradigm, and I have done some study on that. It will be talking about the relationship between a paramount great power, usually continental, like the former Soviet Union, between Russia and the other successor states. So you are talking about medium and small countries facing a strong neighbor. What would be the relationship between the 2? In history, we find that Ming Zheng, namely Koxinga, his dynasty in Taiwan, facing the just established Manchu dynasty on the Chinese mainland. What was the relationship between the 2 and how it evolved? We will find that it's very interesting because cross-strait relations is characterized by these 3 elements. The first one is we have a divided nation legal framework. But then it's not always the case that political entities in divided nation model would have a very high degree of economic integration. So 2 Koreas, in a sense, is similar to Taiwan and mainland China, but then there's very little trade and economic relations between the 2 Koreas. So we add that, the high economic integration between Taiwan and mainland China to the legal framework of divided nation. And then we have power symmetry. If we take a look at the countries that was or is in divided nation model, we will find that, for example, in historical terms, North and South Vietnam, they have basically the same size of population. South Korea has probably more than twice the population of North Korea. East Germany had about 1/3 of the population of West Germany. So we are talking about not that great difference, even though there is a symmetry. But if we are talking about the population between Taiwan and mainland China, we are talking about, like 1/50th, 1/60th. So there's a huge gap between the two. In the past, because of the underdevelopment of the economy on the Chinese mainland, there was a time, I remember, in the 1980s, etc., Taiwan's total GDP was about 1/3, about that size of that of mainland China. And the foreign reserves of Taiwan, that Taiwan was able to accumulate at that time was even higher than the one on the Chinese mainland. I remember I was in mainland China in 1995, and there was a news report, and the reporter was very excited by saying that we surpassed Taiwan province in terms of foreign exchange reserves. And that was in 1995. I remember that vividly. So in the 1980s and 1990s, Taiwan's even though in terms of population much smaller than mainland China, but in terms of economic prowess, etc., the power asymmetry was not that great. But now we are like 1/20th, probably less than that, of the GDP of the Chinese mainland. So you put these three together, divided nation model, which is a legal framework, high degree of economic integration, and great power asymmetry. That makes the case of cross relations very unique. And then the second dimension is domestic politics. And here we can talk about the political competition. And political competition takes place in the two entities in a highly different way. In Taiwan, it is through multi-party competition in elections. In the Chinese mainland, it is political succession within the party-state framework. And it will have a great impact on cross-relations, and that will be my main focus. And we can also talk about the state-society approach, which basically deals with how interest groups, and especially interest groups based on economic interests, will influence the state. And it is, of course, more the case in Taiwan than in mainland China, because mainland China is more top-down and Taiwan is bottom-up. And anyway, the economic relations, the social exchanges, the marriage, the trade, investment, the students, and so on and so forth, they have developed their own interests, and that will have impact on cross-strait relations. So that's state-society approach. And then the identity and social psychology approach. Today, probably everyone knows that there are two most famous maps or figures that will be shown on the front page of the Election Study Center at National Cheng Kung University. Everyone, if you go to that web, you will see these two because they put it on the first page because they know that it is most wanted. It will show the development of the Taiwanese preference for unification and independence. And it will also show the national identity of the people in Taiwan. Are you a Chinese, are you a Taiwanese, are you both Chinese and Taiwanese, and so on and so forth. But these kind of things would give you a picture about the identity and social psychology. Now the third dimension is the international environment. For example, the asymmetrical strategic triangle. I was talking with President Zhou Xinyi before the forum began, and the focus is on this. We have to bring in the United States and its role in the strategic triangle. And furthermore, it's not a typical strategic triangle, it's an asymmetrical strategic triangle. So here we find different actors with different capacities interact with one another in a strategic way. And then there is this international system approach and constructivism. So in all, we have three dimensions, we have a lot of theories. What does that mean? It means that we can identify the most relevant factors that impact on cross-strait relations. So we can put the insights of those theoretical approaches together. It's mainland China and Taiwan. And these three are the interaction dimensions. The divided nation, they are in high economic integration, and there's a power symmetry between these two. And this is the interaction dimension. And then we can look into the domestic politics of the two sides. We can take a look at this political succession in mainland China. We can look into the surging Chinese nationalism and its impact on cross-strait relations. We can talk about the economic interest. At the same case in Taiwan, its election, its identity conflict, especially the rising Taiwanese nationalism and economic interest. Actually, it is during the elections and political successions that the identity and the economic interest will have the greatest impact on the policy of Taiwan as well as on mainland China. So here we are talking about domestic dimensions. And finally, if we bring United States, Japan, EU, etc., of course the most important one would be the United States, then we have this. We have a strategic triangle, and this is the international dimension. So this diagram put together all the three dimensions and the most relevant theories, and they bring out the most relevant factors that have an impact on cross-strait relations. And we can further organize those factors. And we can see Taiwan is actually torn apart. And we use this, Taiwan's position between independence and unification, or status quo, as the main dependent variable, and see what are the most relevant independent variable, the factors that have an impact on this. Divided nation, the legal framework, is to maintain the status quo and ultimately push towards a kind of integration and in long historical terms, probably unification. Because in our constitution and in the PRC's constitution, it's clearly stated that China is a unified nation, and the 1992 consensus is based on that understanding. Economic integration, the two sides are so closely integrated, it's impossible to think about breaking up all those very close economic and social ties. And so these linkages are pushing the two sides closer. And I would say that these two are most comparable to the German cases, because the German, the federal Germany, West Germany, had the basic law, right? And it provides the room for the then future unification with East Germany. And economic integration, the European case shows that economic integration may bring about a political integration. This is called the spillover, right? It's from the low functional economic sphere spilling over to the political, the high integration realm. So it's spillover. But then there will be people pointing out that if you do not have basic political consensus, then there will be a spillback, namely the stagnation in terms of political amalgamation may downgrade your economic integration. Anyway, this is the economic integration. So these two are moving towards this direction, towards unification, and they use blue. Everyone knows in Taiwan, blue means status quo and unification, and green would suggest a movement towards independence. It's not clear, right? Okay. This is power asymmetry. Power asymmetry shows that when the capabilities, the strength, the economic prowess, whatever, between Taiwan and mainland China is becoming greater and greater difference between the two. Power asymmetry has become more severe. Then people in Taiwan have this fear that any movement towards unification can only bring about one thing, that is unification under the terms dictated by Beijing, because they are so big, they are so powerful, they are so huge. So if we get close to them, we will be swallowed. It would be like Crimea by Putin's Russia. And so this power symmetry is fomenting a psychology in Taiwan that is very much suspicious of any move towards unification. And this is Taiwanese identity. There's a surging Taiwanese identity which would look into the history of Taiwan, would selectively emphasize those features and historical development that shows that Taiwan really is not an integral part of China. And that, through textbook changes and so on and so forth, has brought about a very strong surge of Taiwanese identity. Taiwanese identity doesn't need to be exclusionary, but then this one is exclusionary, namely it includes the Chinese identity. I'm just Taiwanese exclusively, so I'm not a Chinese, and I have nothing to do with people living across the Taiwan Strait. We are different nations, and obviously, no matter how economically integrated we are together, we will not form a single nation. And these two, I would say four forces tearing Taiwan apart will be played out in elections. And so different political camps, different political parties will champion different directions of Taiwan's development. It will play out in the elections, and whoever wins the seat of presidency will be the most powerful politician in Taiwan, and he or she would then direct the country towards the direction that he or she desires. However, there is this red line, and Americans would never say this, but we know they mean it. Namely, don't go too far towards unification, because that would cost the United States a lot in terms of strategic competition with mainland China. So there's a red line there. The Taiwan's elections may elect politicians of different political colors, and if some of them, if they push to this direction, then the United States will let you know that they are worried. On the other hand, on the independent side, we have the PRC US red line. Why is the case? Because we understand the PRC is very worried about Taiwan becoming the jury independent entity. So there's a red line drawn there. And the United States, it is an instrumental position. Namely, the United States is worried about being drawn into a conflict with mainland China it doesn't want itself to be in, so that it will also warn Taiwan not to move too much close to the independence pole on the spectrum, because it's worried about Taiwan as the tail may wag the dog, that the United States will be drawn into a conflict which it does not want to be in. And so the United States, both the US and the PRC, are drawing this red line. So even though we have those forces tearing Taiwan apart, and the politicians elected may bring the country in this or that directions, we have two red lines basically confining Taiwan to the middle ground. You can move around, but you cannot break you cannot cross the red line. Otherwise, there will be very severe international repercussions. And so that's basically the picture. When we talk about different theories, the insights of the theories, the factors pointed out in the theories that let us know what are the major factors on cross relations, and we bring them together in this diagram. And today I'm going to concentrate on a particular issue, namely the domestic political dimension. And we will talk about election and political succession. Our assumption is that political elites, they are power maximizers. It's like businessmen are profit maximizers. And if they are in strong power position, then they will not be worried about being attacked by domestic political rivals, and thus they can concentrate on external relations per se. So if they are relatively safe in terms of their power position, they are not worried about being toppled or severely criticized or lose elections or not be able to remain in power after the next party Congress. If they feel safe politically, then they can handle cross relations, foreign policy, and so on and so forth by concentrating on itself. So in its own right. But then if they find themselves in weak political position, then they will be vulnerable to attack by domestic rivals, and thus has to be tough in foreign relation posturing. You have to appear very strong, otherwise you will be severely criticized. So the crux of the matter is, only the strong man can appear weak. The weak has to appear strong. Now, elite power position. How is elite power position determined? How do we know that a particular political leader is in a strong or weak power position? Because the PRC and the ROC have different political systems. In China, we have political succession game under one-party rule. And in Taiwan, we have multi-party electoral competition. So it's different. If elite find themselves in power competition, then they are vulnerable, right? There's a competition. Someone will replace you, so you don't feel as safe as when you are not in political competition. If their power is secure, then they have leeway in foreign and cross-strait policy. So it's like this: the stage in political competition, whether you are in competition or you are not. This is determined by the system, would determine your power position. And your power position will determine your cross-strait policy posturing, whether you have to appear tough because you are weak, or you can make a lot of concessions because you are strong. This is how domestic political competition affects cross-strait relations. Now, let's take a look at China, the one-party system. The General Secretary, JS, is the weakest, right after inauguration. And why is the case? Because political succession is arranged, right, behind closed doors. And it's not determined by popular vote. So when Xi Jinping was first elected as General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, at the 18th Party Congress, I remember a lot of people were saying that Xi Jinping might be the weakest General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. No one knows it. And people were guessing probably Li Keqiang, probably Li Yuanchao, and so on and so forth will be the General Secretary. But Xi Jinping, I mean, he is probably the third, fourth. He's not focused as the future strongman of China. And we all know that there was a lot of political turbulence right before the inauguration of Xi Jinping. It might be a coup in February 2012, right? And then there was some bizarre things going on in China. Bo Xilai, I mean, his wife poisoning a Briton in a hotel, and it shows that there are a lot of things going on in the Chinese political system. Some people are getting together to oppose the succession of Xi Jinping to Hu Jintao. So Xi Jinping must be a weak person. And all this is because everything was arranged behind closed doors. It's a one-party system. So when the General Secretary was inaugurated, he was actually in the weak position. He needs to consolidate his power, and that would take a process. So the process of consolidation is needed for the General Secretary to be secure in power. Thus you have two stages in mainland China: power transition and power consideration. In power transition, he he is simply trying to consolidate his role as the supreme leader of the party. And during power consolidation, we say that he has already consolidated his power. In a multi-party political system, the president, we are talking about Taiwan, he is vulnerable, or she is vulnerable when facing election, but much more secure in power after winning election. So we can talk about two stages: electoral period, that is when the president is campaigning, is facing keen political competition from his rivals, not only outside the party or outside the bloc, and sometimes within his or her own political party. And then inter-electoral period. So we can have these power transition and power consolidation in China, and electoral period and inter-electoral period in Taiwan. And when a political leader is in any of these periods, then his or her power position is determined. It shows that he or she is strong or weak in that position. And that would have a great impact on his or her posturing on foreign and cross-strait policies. Since the 1990s, Taiwan typically took initiative in cross-strait relations by shifting between positions. And this is a very interesting case. Taiwan is a smaller side, but it has been fluctuating all the time. But then mainland China has been quite consistent. Everything's done Xiaoping in its basic policy position towards Taiwan. And it has to do, of course, with power turnovers. We have already, right, 3 power turnovers in Taiwan, right? And there's steep schism even within the party. Li Denghui and Lian Zhan and Ma Ying-jeou, they are quite different species, political species. On the other hand, when Taiwan is moving and shifting and fluctuating, mainland China has been very consistent. But mainland China in the past was not in a position to set the agenda. It has to deal with Taiwan, but not move the whole process along based on its own political agenda. It was not that strong enough. And that was in the past, but that was typically the case in the past more than 2 decades. Taiwan's mainland policy shifts a lot. Primarily as the president experiences different power positions, while the General Secretary of the CCP responds to Taiwan's stimuli in different modes as determined by their own power positions. So Taiwan is moving, is jumping, is fluctuating because of its own domestic situations, and mainland China is responding to that also based on the General Secretary's own power position. And so the cross-strait policy varies inversely with elite power position. If you are strong, you can appear weak. If you are weak, you have to appear strong. In Taiwan, during the electoral period, the president cannot afford to appear weak against mainland for fear of losing votes. And there's the need to galvanize political base, particularly for the Green camp. So if you want to get votes, you have to appear defiant. You have to defy Beijing. During the electoral period, the Taiwan president is more capable to concentrate on cross-strait relations per se. And during the second term, for pro-independent president, the second term provides additional incentive to pursue ideological goal, hence there's a thrust towards independence. So Taiwan's own political system provides those incentives for the president to appear either moderate or defiant against Beijing. And we can talk about whether the president in the first term, the second term, whether it is in inter-electoral or in electoral period. And there will be 4 levels of assertiveness vis-a-vis the Chinese mainland, and it boils down to this figure. between election, the inter-electoral period is low, and when election come, then it will be more assertive. After the election, it will go down, but because this is the second term, so it will not go down as low as level 1, and it will surge towards the final election. Now, on the Chinese mainland, in power transition period, there will be lukewarm response to Taiwan's cooperative gesture for fear of being deceived. Now, if you are deceived by Taiwan, what would be your own political position inside the Communist Party? You will become a sucker, right? But then it would, the General Secretary would react very strongly to Taiwan's provocations to preempt domestic criticism. So it has to appear very strong, very tough on Taiwan if there is provocations from Taiwan's side. Both gestures are defensive. Now, in power consolidation, the General Secretary would actively respond to Taiwan's overtures because he can afford to play the soccer role. If Taiwan is showing friendly gestures towards Beijing, then the General Secretary can say, no problem. I mean, I can deal with that. I can talk with their leaders. I can, do a lot of things because I'm not afraid of appearing weak in front of domestic audience because I have a strong power position, and can respond in a measured way to Taiwan's provocations. If there's something happening in Taiwan on the island, this General Secretary can tell himself that this is because of the domestic political competition in Taiwan. I don't have to respond. And these two positions are both based on the secure power position of the General Secretary. Okay, and this is our way to differentiate between the transition and consolidation stages of the General Secretary, like in leadership, acquisition of the jury leadership position, capable of making decisive decisions, in the military, in the governance, and in competition. And so basically, it is when the General Secretary was first inaugurated in his first term that he is in power transition period, and the second term, power consolidation period. But for people like Xi Jinping, he achieved power consolidation like in the middle of his first term by this huge purge movement of horrifying every cadre in China because he holds the secret, the so-called black materials, 黑材料. And so everyone was terrified. And he managed to purge a lot of actually corrupt cadres and establish himself as the paramount leader. But anyway, every General Secretary would have to move from transition to consolidation. Okay, we have all these assumptions, hypotheses. Let's test the hypothesis by observing the 19 major incidents, cross-strait events from 1989 to 2012. And we use this cross-strait interaction index from 6, which is the most positive, to -6. The 6 would be end cross-strait hostilities, like signing of a peace accord. And -6 would be outbreak of direct military confrontation between the two sides. And we use that to give a score to each of the 19 events which have been picked up as most significant between 1989 and 2012. And we have this. It's going up and down, up and down. And we can find the major events, like the most positive development is the Jiang 8点, Jiang's 8 points proposals, the new China 3 sentences, 新一中三段论, so on and so forth. And then we have the low points, such as President Lee Teng-hui's visit to the United States and the mesoscale and the two-state theory in 1999. I think it was announced when Lee Teng-hui was interviewed by Deutsche Welle in 1999. And here we have the defensive referendum and the anti-secession law, which is a low point, and the cease to apply the guidelines for national unification. These are the low points. So we can mark those points and we can show the trends. The hypotheses we find are borne out. Now, we can imagine what would be the worst combination based on our theoretical hypothesis. It would be in Taiwan to have a pro-independence president in his or her second term electoral period, right? Plus, in mainland China, we should have a general secretary in power transition, namely his power is not secure. So we have two leaders, both in weak power positions. And that means that they have to respond to the other side's stimulus very cautiously if that's a positive sign, and very aggressively if that's a negative sign. In 1989 to 1912, there were 4 periods of high confrontation, and I've just pointed out. 1995-96, Lee Teng-hui's visit to the US and following mesoscale. Lee Teng-hui's two-state theory of 1999. Chen Shui-bian's 2003-4 defensive referendum, 防御性公投, and 2006-7, the abolition of national unification guideline / the new constitution / join the UN under Taiwan. So these 4 periods are the ones in which we observe the highest degree of confrontation between Taiwan and mainland China. And Lord behold, all 4 occasions have to do with Taiwan's presidential elections. Especially the second-term presidents are more assertive than the first-term presidents. So the two-state theory actually is more aggressive than the US visit. Because in the two-state theory, the first time an ROC president says that our relationship with mainland China is one between 2 states. And B, the new constitution, 新宪法, etc. I mean, this is Taiwan independence, pure and simple. It's actually more provocative than defensive referendum, because we all remember the content of that referendum, right? It is basically about whether Taiwan should pursue a US missile and whether there should be negotiations across Taiwan Strait and so on. So it's a moderate content, but the new constitution, etc. It's very provocative. And why is the case? Because B is in Lee Teng-hui's second term. A is in Lee Teng-hui's first term. D is in Chen Shui-bian's second term. C is in Chen Shui-bian's first term. Hence, bearing out our hypothesis that the electoral period and second-term president are very assertive in Taiwan. However, Beijing's responses to those provocations did not exactly match the degree of challenge. Beijing's response to A is greater than B, remembering that B is a greater provocation than A, but China responded more vigorously, more aggressively in A than in B. China responded also more aggressively to C than to D, even though D is more aggressive than C. Why is that the case? The reason is even though A and C are less confrontational, they fell in power transition periods for Jiang and Hu, hence prompting aggressive responses from the newly inaugurated General Secretary. Has to respond very aggressively because his own power position is weak. While B and D are more provocative to Beijing, Jiang and Hu could respond in a measured way, for they had consolidated their power by then. Hence, General Secretary in power transition is more confrontational. So this is the diagram we already have, right? And these are the four low points. And we can clearly see that, this is Li Denghui in his first term, this is Li Denghui's second term, this is Chen Shui-bian's first term, this is Chen Shui-bian's second term. But in terms of provocation, this is more serious than this. B is more serious than A. D is more serious than C. But in our measurement of confrontation across Taiwan Strait, the lower you go, the more severe the response is from mainland China. This is -5, right? So we can see that even though this is a greater provocation than this, B greater than A, the response from China is the response to the less confrontational is greater than the response to less confrontational. So we have this development, and we have this. And why is this the case? We can't see this because the shade that I use. Okay, this because here we have the power transition period of Jiang Zemin. So he would have to respond to Taiwan's provocation more vigorously. But here, Jiang Zemin has already consolidated his power. Here is the Hu Jintao's transition period. This is Hu Jintao's consolidation period. And so we have this response inversely relates to the degree of provocation from Taiwan. And furthermore, the positive response from Jiang in his power transition period is less generous than his response when he has already consolidated his power. And this is for Hu. So we bear out the hypothesis based on our theoretical assumptions. Now, we talk about, I'm using too much time, and this is rapidly closing the end of the presentation. Xi Jinping and the abolition of the terms limit. Xi Jinping, with rapid consolidation of power, Xi was able to meet Ma Ying-jeou during his first term. So he actively responded to Taiwan's friendly gesture. If Xi Jinping was not secure in his domestic power base, he would not have dared to meet Ma Ying-jeou. Because everyone knows that after Ma Ying-jeou will be Tsai Ing-wen. So what would that make Xi look like? A sucker, right? You give Taiwan international exposure, and then the new Taiwan president says that I'm not going to recognize 1992 consensus. Taiwan is no part of China. But she's not afraid, because by that time, he has already rapidly consolidated his own political power. He even scrapped the term limits, which indicates his intention to stay in power after 2022. So he's that power position. It's just incredible for people to think about Jiang Zemin or Hu Jintao, doing things of this sort. According to our studies, strengthening of General Secretary's power position makes Xi more responsive to Taiwan's overtures and measured in his response to Taiwan's provocations. So based on that, I would say that my observation was different from our intelligence chief, who responded in the legislators' questions in the legislature by saying that he does not agree those who say that a more powerful Xi Jinping is more stable. He says that a more powerful Xi Jinping is destabilizing the cross relations. But I'm pointing out the opposite direction based on my study. Hence, conducive to cross-strait stability, while Taiwan, it's the Taiwan side that is moving into the electoral period, which is destabilizing. Because we're moving into a position where the president is weak, is vulnerable. She's facing not only the possible presidential challenger from the KMT, but also a Ke Wen-je, Taipei's mayor, who might be considered as, broadly speaking, in the Green camp, but outside the DPP, but also her own Prime Minister, Lai Ching-te, who always registered a high popularity rate than the president herself. So a lot of rivals, right? And we are facing the presidential election. You want to be sure that you can galvanize your political base to support you. What would be a more appropriate way of mobilizing your political base than to take a tough position against China? So I'm expecting President Tsai to be tougher and tougher as the election nears. So they are stable, we are not. But the Xi era, however, the above is based on the interaction pattern in the past 2+ decades, when the PRC was not strong enough to set the agenda and Taiwan took initiative. Remember we said that? But China under Xi Jinping is changing those parameters, and Beijing is gradually capable of setting the agenda and solve the Taiwan issue. Because Beijing today is different from China more than 2 decades ago in 1995. Hence, Xi's power consideration itself is conducive to cross-strait stability, but the ever-enlarging power gap between mainland China and Taiwan bodes ill for cross-strait stability. So we are observing two tendencies, two developments, and they have opposite effects on cross-strait peace and stability. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for this very excellent presentation. It's very good theoretical overview. Was also very much intrigued by the 19 cases, your case studies, which you tested your hypothesis. So I think probably some of you have some questions, I guess, to ask. It was a very interesting presentation, so I give you the floor. Do you have any questions to the speaker?
I'm wondering, can it be used as a prediction of what President Tsai is going to do, and what is the cross-strait relations is going to happen? What I have in mind is 3 periods after. One would be the election, 2 years of election that has happened in Taiwan. One is local election, one is presidential election. As you have predicted, Tsai's position will be tough and tougher during that period. But are we going to see a break right after Tsai's getting her second term? That there's a genuine possibility that the cross-strait relations will improve because all the scenarios have come up. And that can sustain us to go through the third crisis period, which is at the end of the second term of Tsai Ing-wen. That would be the most dangerous, as you have shown in Li Denghui and Chen Shui-bian. My question is, would it produce some kind of prediction?
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Indeed, if Tsai Ing-wen follows Chen Shui-bian's scenario very closely, then we will find a dramatic change of her position right after Xi's re-election. And this is exactly what Chen Shui-bian did. Let's remember what Chen Shui-bian campaigned for prior to the 2004 presidential election, right? 2003, 2004 referendum, that's the 3 missions of the DPP. 民进党的3大任务, rewriting the constitution, so on and so forth. Very provocative. But right after the inauguration, people were rumoring that probably Chen Shui-bian, before the delivery of the presidential inauguration address, he actually sent the address to the United States. Let everyone know that he is actually moderate. So if you take a look at his inauguration address in 2004, you will see why those in the pro-independence group were so disappointed. They were so disappointed because Chen Zhibian was already not on the same page as they were, because Chen Zhibian had moved on. But then, as the 2007 and 8 election neared, we found Chen Zhibian again doing a lot of provocative gestures. So that's the Chen scenario, closely followed the curve that I mapped out in the figure. So whether would that be the case with Tsai Ing-wen, I would think that would be a general pattern. But suppose the KMT is not able to come up with an attractive candidate. Let's remember that in 2004 we have Lian Zhan and Song Chu-yu teaming up, who in the previous election garnered 60% of popular vote, and Chen Zhibian got only 40%. So Chen Zhibian had to do some dramatic things in order to overcome this gap. But if the KMT come up with Julie Wen, Eric Chu, I don't know how much vote he could get, but definitely much less. So he would be a much lesser threat to Tsai Ing-wen than Lian Zhan and Song Chu-yu was to Chen Zhibian. But that means that Tsai Ing-wen doesn't need to become that tough in order to beat her KMT candidate. So ironically, the weakening of the KMT is better for cross-strait stability. And if Ke Wen-je, KMT candidate, and Lai Ching-te, whatever, they kind of cancel each other off, so that Tsai Ing-wen emerged as not very strong, but relatively stronger than all of them. Then again, there was no reason for Tsai to change her quote-unquote moderate cross-strait policy. So it all depends on how this played out. But I would still say that if she gets re-election in a second term, there will be a natural thrust towards the ideological drive. That will be inevitable.
Yeah, thank you. I really liked your presentation. It was very inspiring to do this sort of play in your mind. But I have several questions. One is, are we really sure that the abolishment of the term limits is a sign of strength and of completed consolidation of Xi Jinping's power? Also, the General Secretary and the President are not the same thing. I mean, Deng Xiaoping didn't need any formal position to still wield a lot of power. And General Secretary is certainly a more important position than being the President of China. So how do you assess these two positions against each other? And then I was wondering what your criteria are for what consolidation of power of the General Secretary means. In other words, what explains what? If China responds more generously to what Taiwan does, is this an indicator of the consolidation of power, or is it the other way around? It goes in the same direction as the prediction thing, I suppose. Which explains what? Because I think there is a lot of debate how strong Xi Jinping really is at the moment, and whether this second abolishment of terms really is a sign of this, power concentration in his hands. And then the last question is about the United States. Your model seems to assume that there are two red lines and the position of the US is not changing on the framework it sets for Taiwan or for cross-strait relations. So there is no unification on the one hand, despite what the US has said, that if both countries are share the same opinion about that, they're fine with unification. And on the other hand, that also too far moving into the independence direction is also a red line. You think that's unchanging, considering how the power relationship or the power balance between the US and China is changing?
Thank you very much for the insightful questions. Whether the abolition of terms for the president of the People's Republic of China is really a sign of Xi's strength, I would say yes. It's a unanimous approval. But I agree with you. I don't know whether you hint at that, but I tend to agree with some of those who think that Xi has not won the minds and hearts of the officialdom, because they were horrified by him. And he has not come up with the kind of achievements that Mao Zedong did. But he aspired the role of Mao Zedong. So this gap, I think, also makes a lot of people, especially in the officialdom, among the officials, not. And Mao Zedong built the People's Republic of China, right? So when Xi Jinping is making those gestures that seem to equate him with the status Mao Zedong, that's preposterous for a lot of people. But in terms of external constraints on the officials, I think he has consolidated his power. And the way he dealt with Sun Zhencai right before the party congress, he was hopeful as one of the two paramount leaders who would take over at the 20th Party Congress. This, I think, was deliberately made to show that he really is the most powerful president. He can get rid of you if he wants. No one is beyond his power, the realm of his power. Scrapping the terms doesn't mean that Xi Jinping will go on as the paramount leader, because this only applies to the president and not the general secretary. Yes, indeed, that's the case. But if the president and general secretary are different, and Xi Jinping can serve as a third-time general secretary without serving as the president of the PRC, then why bother scrapping the terms? And I think one of the most relevant defenses for Xi Jinping's move was to say that 三位一体, 3-in-1 is most important. What does that mean? That if the paramount leader in China should hold the three positions simultaneously, as the president of the PRC, as the general secretary of the party, and as chairman of the military commission. And why is the case? It's only when Xi Jinping is going to serve as the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party beyond the next Party Congress that he would need to change the term limits so that the 3-in-1 principle can persist. So I think all the evidence converge to point out that this is a deliberate move by Xi Jinping to make him not only a third-term General Secretary or fourth-term, but concurrently serving as the president of the PRC when he continue in his party position. So that's my observation. We don't know if somehow Xi Jinping, after making this great change, retired completely from the political scene. Like his predecessor, that would be the greatest surprise in Chinese politics. But I think he's pushing towards that direction. Whether consolidation, whether generous to Taiwan is a sign of consolidation of political power, I think so. And we've been discussing with mainland Chinese scholars and so on and so forth. Why Xi Jinping would want to meet Ma Ying-jeou? Ma was completely lame duck, right? And Xi Jinping is a rising star. And talking to Ma Ying-jeou, you're not going to get any guarantee from Tsai Ing-wen. So why are you doing this? I think Xi is trying to show to the Taiwanese people, including Tsai Ing-wen, that if you abide by the 1992 consensus, this is the kind of international exposure I will grant you. But if you don't do that, I have already said, there will be, the ground would move and the mountain will be shaken, 地动山摇. So he is doubling his sticks and his carrots. But when he is offering his carrots, he's not afraid of people inside the party criticizing him, because he has that control in his party. And finally, whether the US red lines would change when the Sino-American competition intensifies. I don't know, with Trump in power. I can only say that was a pretty much established line. And that was the case in the past 2-3 decades. And I would not imagine even under Trump that the US would tinker with these two red lines. So I would bet that the US will continue with the two red lines, because changing it doesn't seem to benefit the United States strategically. It doesn't want itself to be in an armed conflict with the PRC. And it obviously doesn't want Taiwan to fall into the hands of the PRC because of the intensified competition. So I would bet that Trump will stick to the two red lines.
I would suggest, my question is that, because Xi Jinping now has no successor, and Wang Qishan has no position in the party. What if Xi Jinping fell sick and cannot work anymore? And who will be the successor now? Will that be a chaotic situation? Because the second man in the party is Li Keqiang, and his power is now hollowing out by Xi Jinping, Wang Qishan, and others, for instance, Liu He. And what will happen if the scenarios happen? That's my first question. And secondly, I have a supplement to make. The purpose of Xi Jinping to meet with Ma Ying-jeou is for me to pave the way for Xi Jinping's meeting with Tsai Ing-wen. So maybe you have already indicated. And because there's a trick. Both of them, the meeting of Xi Jinping and Ma Ying-jeou was the so-called leader to leader or original leader to leader meeting. And the prerequisite for the CCP to meet with DPP leaders is for the DPP to change the party statute. And in this case, if in the near future, if the DPP accepts the 1990 consensus, the DPP does not need to change the party statute. Yeah, that's a supplement to your answer just previously.
Well, I completely agree with you on the meeting between Xi Jinping and Ma Ying-jeou is to show not to Ma Ying-jeou, but rather to Tsai Ing-wen what you need to do in order to have this kind of meeting. And you know, your supplement is well received. I think it's quite probable. For the first scenario, what would happen if Xi Jinping falls sick? What would the situation be in China? You know, I think this is always the dilemma of a dictator. If you have a successor, then everyone knows if you fall, who will succeed you, so that the country is prepared for that contingency, which seems to be good for the system. But then for the dictator himself, it's no good, because if he falls, there will be someone who will take over, and that person has the best interest of getting rid of you. So I think for Xi Jinping, it's more important for him to be at ease than for the country to be at ease. So I think to have absolute power in his hands is probably the only way for him to feel secure. And let's remember that before his inauguration, there was a lot of political turbulence. It seems to be that a lot of people inside the party are ganging up against him to prevent him from becoming the true successor to Hu Jintao. So he has to defend, guard against such contingencies. I think he needs double security for his position, based on the way he rose up to his current position. So
From the party or from the state system?
for both, I mean, we talked a lot before the holding of the 19th Party Congress what Xi Jinping would do, and I have said, you know, more than 2-3 years that the critical thing is whether we can find the two persons with the right age who would rise to the ranks of the Standing Committee of the Politburo and become the heir apparent to Xi Jinping. That's the most important thing. And when he did that to Sun Zhencai, everything was clear. I mean, he is not going to make anyone become his heir apparent. There will be no crown prince. There will be only him. And so I think that would create a certain degree of stability. But that would also provide a long-term instability, not only in the sense that he may fall sick, but also in the sense that why should I obey you if you are going to hang on for life? So for those disgruntled high cadres, this is a more intolerable situation. In the past, you have to bear with a Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin for 10 years, but that's all, right? Because there will be a turnover of political power. But with Xi, you don't know how long he is going to stay on. So I would say that Xi has planted seeds of instability within the system. It's a good move probably for him. It's not a good move for the Chinese Communist Party. That's my observation.
Thank you. Please.
Professor Wu, I'm very impressed by your model. If I understand your model correctly, basically what you're suggesting is that for mainland China, you know, basically the Chinese Communist Party leader tend to be more aggressive in their first term because they have not consolidated their power. They tend to be more reconciliatory, probably in their second term, because they tend, you know, already have consolidated their power. But this is the opposite of the Taiwanese side, right? The first term for Taiwanese leader tend to be more reconciliatory, because they just got the mandate, because, after the election. But they tend to be more aggressive in their second term because they are going to, because they have nothing to worry. They don't have to worry about their re-election. So then they will take the more ideological, stand on the cross-strait relations. So looks like this is just a kind of interesting pattern between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. If that's the case, of course there are some years of overlapping, right, in terms of terms. If that's the case, do you think that that means that it is always possible that for the two sides to avoid a crisis? Because when you are aggressive, the other side is more reconciliatory. The other way around, also true. So no matter what happens, because when the Taiwanese side tend to be more aggressive, then the Chinese side could be more reconciliatory. They are in a power position to be more accommodating. If that's the case, I think that we are more optimistic about the future of cross-strait relations because their pattern suggests that we can always try to avoid crisis because the power posturing on both sides are kind of the opposite. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. I think if it happens that the two sides are not in the same power position, then they tend to even each other out. And that would be good. And we have already observed that, namely when Taiwan is more provocative, when the managing secretary is more consolidated, his response will be more measured. But actually we can talk about four possibilities, right? Two, both are strong and that's conciliatory. Both are weak and that's mutually hostile. And one weak, one strong, even each other out. So we can actually talk about the four scenarios. And I think the one that we need to be worried about most is when the two sides are both weak. And so we need to have something, other factors in the leaders' minds to prevent the need to appear tough from damaging cross-strait relations too much. But I think it will be very hard because all politicians, this is my assumption, all politicians are power maximizers. So they can be very generous, they can be very insightful, they can have a vision. But that's only when their own position is secure. When their position is not secure, when they are threatened by their own domestic rivals, the primary consideration would be to deal with domestic game first and then shift to the external game. And if that's the case, then both sides need to appear tough towards the other side. Otherwise, they would undermine their domestic position. So I don't see how this, four combinations, three are manageable, one is most dangerous, but in that most dangerous scenario, I think the two sides are still hostage to their own domestic game. I don't see any way out. So I'm pessimistic 25% and optimistic 75% because we are talking about four scenarios.
Maybe the last question. Yeah, last one.
Okay. I like models very much, but I always have the big problem that clarity in models comes at the cost of oversimplifying the situation. And you just the last statement, you went back to your assumption elites are power maximizers. If I just look at these terms, you're not talking about elites, you are talking about 2 or 3 leaders. And the assumption is that one leader has to attain the position of dominance. But if you just look at the situation in Taiwan, if you you only factor in the role of the president. So the aim of elites or of those aiming at obtaining this one position would be what means are necessary to become president. But once you are president, you need legislators, you need majorities in the other institutions. In the case of the PRC, you focus on intra-elite infighting and struggle for power. What about, if you look at the last 10, 20 years of the Soviet Union, what about the shared interest of all the leading people in the upper echelons of system maintenance? Of course, if Brezhnev is gone, there's a vacancy and you have a struggle for succession. But the struggle has been modified by the shared interest of all those power-maximizing elites of avoiding system breakdown. And that would mean you make compromises, you restrain the means, the choice of means to obtain the dominant position. And all these elements in your model are put aside. You just look at the one strategy to obtain the dominant position, and this attempt is used as the basis then to explain policies. I think that there are, of course, some insights, but I would say you simplify the normal life situation that an elite or the leading person is confronting in a very, very large degree. And I'm not really sure to what degree can you test these assumptions. You have to be extremely selective. What occurrences in real life you consider as being relevant for testing this assumption. And you have to put out a lot of material that normally influence politicians. You cannot just look at the 3 or 4 big occasions where you can use the power of the office to strengthen or weaken it. Thank you.
I completely accept your comments. I have talked about 3 dimensions and at least like more than 10 theories in the field of cross relations. What I have done is simply to focus on one aspect. And I fully agree with you that I need to put this insight with other elements, for example, economic exchanges or different perspectives of the elite within the establishment, so on and so forth. But nowadays social sciences are like this. you focus on one aspect, but I would contend that this is probably the most important aspect. But then focus on this aspect. Once you establish some causal linkage within it, then you put other variables into it. Now the problem is when you put too much variables into it, the whole clarity, parsimony of the analytical framework is on the mind. So you always have to make a choice between the simplicity of models and the coverage of the details on the ground. I think that's always the choice. So what I have done is a preliminary attempt at the model side, but it didn't show you how I would like to incorporate other elements into this model. So it's a small part of my study, so to speak. All the 3 dimensions and 10 theories are all relevant. I completely agree with you, and I hate the current day social sciences.
So much
Scientific.
more predicted.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't,
predictability.
this means I wouldn't be so optimistic because the 3/4 optimism are based on a very limited, factors coming into play, right?
You always have an intervening variable.
Yeah. But again, you have to make sense of the world. So you need to have an analytical framework. So you always have to make a tough choice between modeling and very detailed underground understanding and taking into consideration contingencies like if Xi Jinping is ill. So it's always in between. And that's inherently difficult for any social scientist.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Wu San, for your excellent presentation and excellent Q&A session. May I invite all of you to give a big hand again to Wu San. I don't know, maybe you still have some time that you can stay with us. Then we will proceed.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, please? Okay. To the next session, I will invite my dear colleague Chen Desen. Yeah, Chen Desen to present his presentation with the title China's Political Economy after the 19th Party Congress of the CCP. Please, Dr. Chen, Professor Chen.
It's my honor to give this presentation to distinguished European delegation. I'd like to thank Dr. Tang invited me to share my research. My topic is institutional changes and state governance in the era of Xi Jinping, opportunities and challenges of unbalanced development strategies. This presentation is divided into 4 key sections: institutional structure and governance strategy, and theoretical perspectives on structure changes and imbalanced relations. Finally, we will make an assessment performance, opportunities and changes of Xi Jinping's government. And on the theoretical perspective, theory of system and mainly discussed the political, economic and social imbalance in the system, calling for a balance in the medium and long-term development for the national governance. In this figure 1, in general situation, a country maintains normal interaction among 3 elements in a state system. Basically speaking, they should be interaction and coexistence and mutual benefit. And the characteristic of the socialist state system is dominance of politics and superiorities of the economy and the weakness of society. This is the characteristic of political and economic and social system in different type of country. So in this figure 2, from this figure, it shows politics is in China today is in dominant position, and the economical development is the essence of the CCP's power. Therefore, they are prioritize resources allocation. A society is relatively weak position for political control and participation. The comparison between the socialist and the democratic state shows that the former is a political dictatorship, but economic and social transformation and the changes are rapid. However, as far as reality is economic, democratic government does not necessarily have an edge over the socialism because populism, disability, and poverty are still the main challenges. Socialist state perform better on a specific topic of the economic growth and implementation efficiently. So the system operation and the comparison regarding how great the political system and the ideals are. If national governance fail to provide the skill, quality of the public administration is unable to respond to international changes and social development cannot be sustainable, it will be face a legitimacy crisis sooner or later. So China, let's see China's structural changes and imbalanced relations. After 19 Party Congress and of the CCP and the first session of the 13th National People's Congress, China's institutional structure displays the following characteristic. On the policy level, it furthers the political dominance and power concentration. On the economic dimension, economy is a priority. It is further confirmed. And on the social level, and society's weakness and control. It is its weakness is re-emphasized. Let's see some example. Politics of dominance shows 5 characteristics as follows. First is no designated successor. And we can see this table. There is no successor, no arrangement for successor. And second, more than 18 members of Politburo Standing Committee are loyal partners and followers. Let's see the table 3. And NPC adopted an amendment to the Constitution, including a change in the tenure of the president. In this it shows Xi Jinping won the almost overwhelming support. And next, we can see CCP Secretary General becomes a strong leader among the members of the Politburo Standing Committee. He's the most strong Secretary General during the past 20 years. And Xi Jinping has 3 top political positions and 7 additional centralized coordination posts. You can see the table 5. This picture is true. I met him in 2013 in Boao, you know. Boao.
Sounds your secretary.
And he's the most powerful person in the world. During that time, I think he was very kind, very gentle, like me. but he's ambitious leader. I cannot imagine he's an ambitious leader. And regarding to the economy of the superiority, and Xi Jinping, in his strong leadership, will invest all possible energy to develop the economy and consider the #1 priority for his government, such as the implement of the 13th 5 years plan and ensure 6.5% economic growth. And the society, I think, the main contents including political dominance and control restricted the social development, and the political participation of the citizen is under controlled, and non-government organizations are difficult to develop. According to the Gini index, and it is obvious that China society takes two of the authorization. And according to Gini coefficient data, the higher figure you get, the wider gap between the rich and the poor becomes. So let's make some conclusion. As Xi Jinping government's performance provided with development prospects and exceptional performance in anti-corruption is the highlight, and the key integration. Could it be a new paradigm of the socialist transformation, and with superior quality of politics and decision making, executive power will achieve, as well as market competitiveness and risk management strengthened, it is possible to succeed. And national governance, there is limited communication between the citizen and policy, most of which is dominated by top-down management. I think this is make us worry about it. And the outlook of the Xi Jinping's future political regime, is there a capacity of the policy adjustment? Will the balanced operation policy for promotion be adopted? Will it respond effectively to the internal and external challenge? This is my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhu Zheng. And now we have our second speaker, Dr. Guru Baka. And you still have also 1 point. Yeah, please.
hope I can manage with that.
You need this one? No.
No, I think it's too much to handle the microphone and the paper and the thing. So I will also talk a little bit about the framework for cross-trade relations, about China's foreign policy and the implications for cross-trade relations. And I have to say that in contrast to the previous speakers, I'm convinced that Xi Jinping is a very ambitious leader, so at least in terms of foreign policy. What we have seen in the last 5 years in the first term of Xi Jinping is that the foreign policy of China has become much more proactive and assertive. It's not a complete break with the past. There was always the insistence on China's core national interest, territorial integrity, etc. But I think under Xi Jinping, the assertive foreign policy has accelerated quite a bit. And we see some very drastic changes from previous leaderships. There is a very clear formulation of the ambition where China wants to be by the mid of the century. There are more capacities, there are more resources invested in to implement this new, more proactive foreign policy. And for me, the biggest change is that this motto of Deng Xiaoping, keeping a low profile, Tao Guang Yanhui, has completely disappeared from the official discourse. There were still some academics who tried to keep this motto alive, but it has been it has vanished from all the official speeches, and there is more ambition, finfire way striving for achievement. There is also a lot of talk about the Chinese approach. Some translate that as Chinese solution. I think this is going too far. But the Zhongguo Fang'an, from my perspective, is a way of saying China has something to offer. It can provide global commons. It can be a model for development in other countries. And this is also a break with the past when China said that there is no such thing as a Chinese model. Every country has to find its own developmental path. We will have a presentation on the Belt and Road Initiative later, and I think in this context, the Zhongguo Fang'an is very important. So we see that in terms of international peacekeeping, etc., China is spending a lot more resources and capacities and sells this as its contribution to global commons, while in the past it has been very, very selective on that. It's still selective, but we see a lot broader engagement, which also has to do with the fact that China is much more present in every other region of the world, whether it's Latin America or Africa or Asia. Chinese citizens are living everywhere, and China is economically engaged everywhere. So this brings certain necessities for the Chinese government or leadership to respond to this presence and take care of the citizens abroad, for example. What China really aspires, from my perspective, is discourse power. And for the first time, I think, with the Belt and Road Initiative, they have managed to do this successfully, while previous attempts with the Harmonious World did not really catch on with the internet at the international level. It might be discussed among experts, the Harmonious Society and the Harmonious World, but it did not shape the international discourse like the Belt and Road Initiative now does, because China puts unprecedented resources behind that. I think that in the speech that Xi Jinping gave at the last Party Congress in October, it's all spelled out very clearly where China wants to be by the mid of the century. They want to have a world-class military force that can win wars. We can guess against whom. but it's all very clearly there. And we also see manifestations in the last 5 years, new ones. The first, I would say, is that China has revived and upgraded regional and international organizations or platforms. PICA, which was a completely unknown organization before the summit took place in China, was sort of revived. The Xiangshan Forum was upgraded, so it's clearly now intended to be a rival to the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. There was initiation of new international formats. For example, I think it's important, this annual International Internet Conference that has been convened for 3 or 4 years now, where China is promoting its own vision of the internet as a sovereign space, or a space where sovereignty still plays a decisive role. Then we also see, this is not a complete break with the past, but we see that China is more willing to host international events like the G20 for the first time. It has become more active in the G20 and really tries to make an impact there. The APEC summit was hosted in China as well in these first 5 years of Xi Jinping. And I think the Belt and Road Initiative can be called the flagship project of Xi Jinping. It started very modestly with rolling out 2 slogans, which were very abstract and vague, so to speak, but in the meantime, it really has taken on some force, and it's even projected to the past because it sort of laid over a lot of projects that have been initiated much earlier in 2009 or 2010. It's all now subsumed under the Belt and Road Initiative. In general, we see a toolbox that has been at play before under previous leaderships, but it's very intentionally used, a toolbox with carrots and sticks in it. And we can see one example, a good example, in South Korea, when South Korea deployed the THAAD anti-missile system. We see basically the same tools at play that China also uses when it comes to cross-strait relations. So I will talk about what all this means for cross-strait relations. A few things have been mentioned already before. I think after Tsai Ing-wen and the DPP won the elections, the main focus of China was that Taiwan should, or Tsai Ing-wen should recognize the 1992 consensus. Yesterday we had some talks where people said there is even more expected from Tsai Ing-wen than from Ma Ying-jeou. Not only the 1992 consensus, but sort of the 1992 consensus plus the One China principle. She should embrace that. And the toolbox is at display. We can see very clearly that at the official level, for example, all contacts have been halted. There are no official meetings and also no meetings between AHAZ and the Straits Exchange Foundation, while the agreements that were reached in the 2 terms under Ma Ying-jeou still remain in force. So they are still at the working level. Of course, there need to be communication going on. Instead, we see the carrots now, city partnerships, meetings between mayors, at, meetings at the local level, and academic exchanges, but it's only with selected people that do not, from the Chinese perspective, embrace independence of Taiwan. At the same time, and this is probably the only instrument that China can not use vis-à-vis other countries, there is a step-by-step reduction of China's international space. We see that, like the WHO, ICAO, Interpol, UNFCCC, there are no more invitations to Taiwan representatives even to participate at observers, and there were some pretty nasty events, one meeting in Australia, totally harmless business people meeting where the Chinese delegation insisted on the Taiwanese representatives leaving the room. The diplomatic truce no longer valid, it seems. Several countries have switched their diplomatic recognition and China has accepted that. Some wanted to do the same thing under Ma Ying-jeou's 2 terms, but China simply stayed away from it, so it sort of kept the diplomatic truce. So what I really want to stress is that we see this toolbox at play with a lot of other countries as well. For example, in the case of South Korea, tourism numbers went down quite dramatically. This company was punished that provided the land for deploying THAAD. And so we see that from the Philippines, no bananas were imported. From Norway, no salmon was imported. So there are very selective sort of coercive measures to push a country to rectify a situation that China does not see as right. And on the other hand, you have very clear united front tactics where carrots are provided and incentives, where rewards are offered for behaving well in the eyes of China. Now, if we look at key statements, and I really wonder how this fits into your presentation about the leniency and generosity after the consolidation of power of Xi Jinping, I think we see a difference between the statements on Taiwan in the party congresses of 2002, 2007, and 2012. It was pretty stable. It was always the same elements that were listed. There was the guiding principle of peaceful reunification under one country, 2 systems, and then the enumeration of Jiang Zemin's 8-point proposal of 1995, which Xi Jinping in his speech made no reference to at the 19th Party Congress. And also he left out this formulation about China trusting in the Taiwanese people to move in the right direction. So this was scrapped from the speech. When he gave a speech at the 90th anniversary of the PLA, he listed these 6 any that China would under no circumstances allow certain moves of Taiwan. So we can say that there is sort of a cold peace between China and at least the DPP government. Other parts of the Taiwanese society are still welcome to exchanges with China. While some people feel that there would be a timeline introduced into unification again at the 19th Party Congress, or there could be a change of the anti-secession law at this National People's Congress. This has not happened, but if we look at the very explicit linkage between completing the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, and which cannot be complete without reunification with Taiwan, it is clear that there is sort of a timeline. Whether it's before 2049 or 2049, I would say is the latest, because by then the aspiration is that the Chinese dream will be completed and the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation will be well on its way. This is also something we discussed yesterday at the Mainland Affairs Council. China announced these 31 measures in February. This is very new. I think it's part of this United Front tactics. You sort of give incentives to Taiwanese citizens to be treated as equal in mainland China, and it's the question or the challenge for Taiwan how to respond to that. I didn't include the speech that Xi Jinping gave at the National People's Congress just a few days ago, but I think the wording was very harsh. He obviously got a lot of applause. So maybe you would explain it as a preventive measure in terms of, going into a consolidation cycle. It's certainly not a gesture of generosity in the direction of Taiwan. So in conclusion, I would say that we clearly see that China globally has spelled out its ambitions. All the security laws that have been passed in the last 5 years also make a clear linkage between the outside or the external dimension and the domestic dimension. This is much more interlinked now than it was 5 years ago. And China is using its economic clout in many countries, which welcome Chinese investment and loans for obvious reasons. But this also means that China can put more pressure on other countries and on companies to rectify the situation if they sort of violate the One China principle. We see that this has been stepped up in terms of, changing maps, forcing the Taiwan representative offices out of certain capitals. So the economic cloud that China is now projecting in other countries also allows it to put more pressure on other countries to accommodate to the core national interests of China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fukuhaka. And the next one is Professor Xu Siqing. He graduated from the PhD from Denver University and used to be the chair of the political department of National Taiwan University. And he will talk about the accelerating zero-sum interactions in cross-strait relations after 2016.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I would like to express my thankfulness to Professor Tang for inviting me to this conference. And unfortunately, I have to also make an apology in the very beginning for my very belated completion and submission of my paper. I wasn't able to really finish it until this morning, okay? So I couldn't get a printout to make it available to all of you. And so I will just make my presentation according to the full text PDF file here. My topic pretty much in parallel with the so-called zero-sum. With the zero-sum term in my first proposal of the topic of the paper earlier this year. So my precise topic for this paper is the so-called incremental polarization of cross-strait relations since 2016. Okay. So what I'm suggesting here with the term of polarization is that I do see increasingly hawkish or assertive actions undertaken by, well, first of all, and most importantly, by Beijing and US, and to some minor extent by Taipei, that actually makes the cross relations or Taiwan-US-China trilateral relations to evolve incrementally into what can be called the growing polarization in such relationships. Okay. So in this very brief discussion paper, I will try to explore or discuss some of the major conduct undertaken by the three parties that leads to such polarization over time, or since 2016. So let's first look at the developments in Taiwan. Okay. As I guess we all know that President Tsai Ing-wen has refrained from recognizing the so-called 1992 consensus ever since she took over, she was inaugurated. Actually, this had been the case even during the campaign, her campaign for the presidency in before 2016. Okay, and of course we know that Beijing has expressed a lot of disgruntlement with Taipei's rejection to recognize the 90 consensus flatly. However, if we take a deeper look, I guess as we all know that the Tsai administration has repeatedly underscored that it has expressed the so-called maximum goodwill in cross relations. What she meant was that, just short of spelling out 90 consensus, she has, I think, especially in view of the Tsai administration, President Tsai has essentially expressed made all possible statements that actually, in effect, alludes to the reality or existence of 90 consensus. For example, in her inauguration speech, she emphasized that her administration would conduct cross relations pretty much in accordance with the ROC Constitution. And we all know that ROC Constitution is based on the concept of one China. Okay, of course represented by ROC government, not by PRC government. We also know that she stated clearly in her inauguration speech that she would conduct cross relations in accordance with Taiwan's statute governing the people's relation across the Taiwan Strait. So that is also a very important basic law that governs cross relations based on one China principle, which divides the one China into the so-called Taiwan region and the mainland China region. Okay, so so that's the perception and that's the sort of a canon expressed by the Tsai administration. Okay, but of course Beijing has undertaken various actions to express its dissatisfaction with the Tsai administration's conduct. For example, it has cut off the official channel of communication between Taiwan's SEF, the Strait Exchange Foundation, and China's ARAS, the Association for Cross-Strait Relations. Okay. Beijing has also cut off the communications dialogues between the various platforms, functional platforms, that had been established under the Ma administration that governs exchanges and communications and consultations with regard to different policy issues that affect both sides of the Taiwan Strait. For example, issues related to food security, related to illegal immigration across the Taiwan Strait, so on and so forth, right? Okay, so this has been the case. On the other hand, we have to pay attention to another sort of important emergent factor. The Tsai administration has been increasingly criticized and challenged by the radically probing camp in Taiwan. Okay, in the recent 1 year. Okay, these these people, ranging from the important DPP politicians or entrepreneurs and citizen society, have been trying to pressure this administration into taking more radical, more hawkish, more assertive action regarding the political identity or the legal status of Taiwan, trying to push this administration to deviate further away from the One China principle. Okay. Of course, we know that this administration has not shown any indication of succumbing to such pressure. However, in my personal opinion, we have to observe this issue with reference to what happened during the Chen Shui administration during 2000 to 2008. Okay, we all know that during the first 2 years of President Chen, he actually extended some olive branch to China, trying to make political compromise with China, but with no positive responses from Beijing at all. And later on, pretty much under the pressure of the TSU, the Taiwan Solidarity Union, which is as a more radically pro-deep green party in Taiwan, created by former President Li Denghui. Under the pressure of the TSU, President Chen then switched to more challenging actions, exemplified by, for example, his statement of one country on each side of Taiwan Strait, 一边一国, and the foiled attempt to revise the constitution, possibly with implications to change the national identity. Okay, so all these happened, according to most analytic work in Taiwan, pretty much because of the pressure, especially the pressure in elections, trying to win over the support from deep green voters that makes President Chen Shui-bian to be driven to the more radical posture. So that is something that we have to be careful about. We have to observe as an important reference when we want to look at what this administration may do on this issue in the near future. Okay. And another issue I'm trying to emphasize here is the evolution of Taiwan's public opinion. We all know that there are two important sets of Taiwan's public opinion regarding cross-strait relations. One is the practical choice for the political future between Taiwan and China. There's only one question being asked in this survey. Do you prefer the future situation, or the relative political status between Taiwan and China to be moving toward, essentially with 6 options? Okay, you got 2 options, as broadly defined, being pro-independence, digital independence in the long run. I'm sorry, in the long run and the short run. 2 other choices preferring unification in the short and in the long run, and 2 remaining options that prefer status quo. Okay, we know that in the past, I guess 3 or 4 decades or so, there have been consistently at least over 60% of Taiwan people favoring status quo. So that's one set of surveys. The other survey asks only one question. Do you identify yourself as A, Taiwanese, which means Taiwanese only, B, Chinese, which means Chinese only, C, double identity, both Chinese and Taiwanese? Okay. Before 2008, when President Ma took over, it was a situation where double identity always accounted for relative majority. Okay, no more than 50%. But among the 3 choices, those identifying themselves with double identity always accounted for the relative majority. Ironically, it was after President Ma took over that things began to change. Okay, exclusive Taiwan identity began to exceed double identity. Okay. Actually, there is a logical correlation between these 2 surveys, because I think it makes sense for people to expect the exclusive Taiwanese people to favor long-term, at least to favor long-term move toward independence. We would also expect the double identity people to favor the maintenance of status quo in the long run. And we would expect the exclusive Chinese identity people to favor long-term unification, right? So, however, as we can see from public opinion survey, the gap between exclusive Taiwan identity ahead of double identity continues to widen. Okay, though in recent months there has been a little bit of shrinkage, but it was not significant. On the other hand, you still see a stable majority of time people favoring status quo, over 70%. So, you can say either there is this cultural mentality of pragmatism on the side of Taiwanese people, or, in a funny way, there's a schizophrenia on Taiwanese people, right? Okay. But, anyway, there's a sort of firewall between these two, right? But to what extent the firewall would be maintained or begin to succumb to important changes, such as, for example, most importantly in Taiwan, the generational changes regarding their attitudes toward status quo or independence, I think remains to be seen. And I think that's probably even more decisive and powerful than the attitude of the leadership, than President Tsai and her cabinet members to determine Taiwan's move in the near future. Okay. So, but anyway, I do see increasingly stabilizing effect from the evolving tendency of Taiwan's public opinion. And on the economic front, President Tsai has, as I said here, from the very beginning of her tenure, sought to minimize Taiwan's economic dependence or interdependence on China, okay? Chiefly by promoting those industries hardly requiring China's market or inputs, okay? So we all know that there's a famous New Southbound policy, right? So the New Southbound policy at its inception was a design intended to boost Taiwan's economy by promoting trading investment relationships with South Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, as well as Australia and New Zealand. However, frankly speaking, in my observation, which I suspect is the consensus from most scholars in Taiwan, that this policy has really not achieved much in terms of promoting trade investment. So we see that in the recent 1 or 2 years, the Tsai administration DPP has sort of subtly and incrementally shifted the definition, the most important definition, from trade investment promotion to the promotion of Taiwan's soft power as opposed to these countries. For example, this policy is now emphasizing increasing exchanges in terms of culture, education, technology transfers, so on and so forth with these countries. Okay, so essentially, I don't think that's a good sign, for the Tsai administration's economic performance. And worse yet, you see that on a number of issues, the Tsai administration has been pretty much challenged by different segments in the Taiwanese society. So there's such controversial policies or unpopular policies, for example, include the sweeping reduction in the public employees' pensions, the reshuffle of the rules governing the leave period for workers in all industries, and the energy policy, which has really not solved energy shortage in the long run, while contributing to rapidly worsening air pollution. Okay, so these are among the main reasons why you see poor approval rate for President Tsai. Okay, so the most recent public opinion survey conducted by this Taiwan Public Opinion Foundation, which is actually a foundation seen by many as a pro-green, as a pro-penguin institution, that Tsai Ing-wen's, President Tsai's approval rate is only 33.5% now, compared to 47.1% of disapproval. Okay, so that's a strong challenge to President Tsai. And again, how this would affect the Tsai administration's cross-strait policy, I think, has to be observed with reference to what happened under President Chen Shui-bian. President Chen was also undergoing, pretty poor public approval rate. Okay, and that was the prime reason why, according to many analysis in Taiwan, that he had to shift the most fundamentalist sort of camp of voters in Taiwan to secure electoral support at critical junctures. Okay, so that is something, whether or not that will happen again, I guess, remains to be seen. I don't see any indication for that to happen as of now, but that's something still that we have to pay attention to. Okay. On the military front, very simply, I think everybody knows that there is a increasing sort of a military imbalance in favor of China instead of Taiwan. I'm going to skip this part. Okay. Factors from China. I think this is the most important sort of aspect to destabilize the trilateral relations in the past 1 or 2 years. Okay. The first one is regarding the revival of the diplomatic warfare in the international community that Beijing has deprived of 2 of Taiwan's important diplomatic allies. So the first one was Democratic Republic of Sao Tome and Principe. The other one was an even more important one, Panama in Central America, right? And this happened, both of them, the first one happened in 2016, and the second one happened in the next year. But what I see as more destabilizing than the revival of the diplomatic warfare is about Beijing's redefinition of the so-called 92 consensus. We all know that 92 consensus has been was a bedrock of prostrate political common background in the midst of the lingering sovereignty dispute across the Taiwan Strait. Okay. However, in October last year, China's Xinhua news agency, which we know that is China's propaganda apparatus, publicized a list of the terms to be barred from media coverage in China. And among these terms was the exclusion of one China with different interpretations by Beijing and Taipei from the definition of the 1992 consensus. Okay, they no more allow for 一中各表 to be reported or to be spelled out by any media in Taiwan. That is, Beijing signified to Taiwan and in fact to the world that the 1992 consensus is to be is to be defined only as China being represented by the central government in Beijing, and would thus no longer allow for Taipei's perspective that the Republic of China be the legal embodiment of China. Nonetheless, for those Taiwan people who still support the status quo, which is an integral component of the status quo, is the legitimacy and legality of the Republic of China as a sole representation of one China. So in the absence of the ambiguity allowing for both sides different interpretations of which governments standing for one China, there will be more and more Taiwan people that will be driven to alienate themselves from the notion of one China. Okay? So, in my personal view, I think that's a pretty much stupid action undertaken by Beijing. A seemingly assertive and confident action is actually squeezing yourself and narrowing the space for you to reach a peaceful compromise or ultimate solution with Taiwan regarding political dispute. Okay. All right. And yet, the next issue is what I think most of you are aware of, the so-called activation of the 4 different aviation routes, okay? Route M503, W121, W122, and W123, okay? Well, pretty simple. If you look at the figure here, okay? You don't have to look at the Chinese characters, but just look at the actual locations or the routes of these 4, okay? So M503 is the most controversial one because it is dangerously close to the center line of the Taiwan Strait. And we all know that in the past, I guess 5 or 6 decades, the center line in the Taiwan Strait has been a mutually agreed, mutually acquiesced sort of a dividing line for the military aircraft or other vehicles to operate. Okay, so that's a sort of mutually acquiesced center line that has been contributing to the relative peace and stability, especially along the military dimension in the Taiwan Strait. However, China's activation of these routes, especially M503, is not only going to create military risk, the risk of military confrontation in Taiwan Strait, but also actually it intersects with, for example, if you look at the white dotted line here, the pre-existing aviation line between Taiwan and Jinmen and between Taiwan and Matsu. Okay, so that's also going to create a risk for aviation safety. Okay, so that's something that Taipei has disagreed with, and Taipei has been calling for Beijing to engage in mutual negotiation or at least consultation regarding the actual operation of these routes. But Beijing has not responded at all. So that's another sort of potential source of conflict or risk in the future. Okay. What I forgot to mention was something that happened before all of these incidents from China that I just described. That, for example, in 2017, China began to dispatch its reconnaissance airplane and fighter to sail, all along the east coast into the Pacific Ocean, the east coast of China and into the Pacific Ocean, which actually amounted to the 2 rounds of circling of all of Taiwan's territorial space. This never happened before, ever since 1949. Okay, and most analysts think that those may not be something particularly aimed at Taiwan, but pretty much as a move for China to extend, to project its military power further into the airspace of the Pacific Ocean. Ideally, as an attempt to show its military muscle to the U.S. But of course, that generates implications for Taiwan security or for the risk of military competition between Taiwan and China. And finally, if you look at some of the factors from the U.S., well, first of all, we know that there was this famous 10-minute phone conversation between Donald Trump and President Tsai before Donald Trump was inaugurated. But soon after that, okay, and of course, right after that conversation, Donald Trump made some remarks on news coverage trying to challenge the long-standing U.S. one-China policy, okay. But soon after that, after President Trump met with Xi Jinping in April 2017, there is almost a complete turnaround of his attitudes in cross-relations, okay. He stopped defying the U.S. one-China policy during and after that meeting with Xi Jinping. And moreover, after President Tsai indicated in May 2017 that she would pretty much like to have another opportunity of phone conversation with Trump, Trump replied that he has built so-called very good relationship with Xi, that Xi has been making efforts to help with solving the North Korea crisis, that Trump would refrain from causing such troubles for Xi, and that Trump would first talk to Xi before talking to Tsai. So that was, something that almost, I guess, did a humiliation for President Tsai. Okay. Well, but then we know that the most recent, hotly discussed issue, this signature of the Taiwan Travel Act, just last week. Okay. I guess that's something that we can have more discussion on later on. Okay. Whether or not, it's just in a word, as my conclusion. Whether or not Taiwan or U.S. will really take advantage of that act to really make more high-ranking officials visits between each other, or both sides tend to use that primarily as a bargaining chip to induce Beijing to make more compromises, I think remains to be seen. Okay. So that's my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Xu Siqi, for your wonderful presentation. Now I'll open the floor for the discussion. We have been talking about the situation in China, in Taiwan, and also the cross-strait relations and the interaction between all these factors. If you want to raise questions, please do like this. You rate your name tag, so I can see whoever wants to raise questions. But if it's not the case, I will say something at first. For instance, As we all know that we are in a stalemate in the cross-strait relations. I've been wondering, what if, because of the threshold of the referendum has been lowered, that means it's much easier for us to pass a referendum. What if a 1992 consensus referendum is passed? What will be the result? And what will be the impact of Taiwan and also of the cross-strait relations? I'm not sure. But if, then that will be combined with local election this year in November. And the effect will be next year. Will be next year. And will that be a turn, or will that be I'm not sure, a kind of solution to the stalemate between the two sides? This is only a question. I'm not sure, please.
I just want to ask, my name is David Huang, I'm from Inga. I just want to ask Professor Tang, who put forward this initiative of the 99 consensus in conjunction with the local election?
It's a hypothesis.
So it's not realized.
I'm not sure.
But you both.
I mean, only if.
Are you going to do a signature drive? Okay, I think my.
We can try. We can try.
Oh, okay. You can try and I'll see. My question is directly addressed to Professor Xu Siqing. I think I totally agree with you that Beijing made a mistake to narrowing down the definition of negative consensus. Does not allow the ambiguity of the one China with different interpretations on board. I think this is particularly a move. My question is about when did the Beijing started this kind of operations? Is it after the Tsai Ing-wen assumed office, or even before that, when Professor Sanderson here he was attending the Singapore meeting between Ma and Xi? I think at that time Beijing already want to have a common definition of 99 consensus. No, so I would argue, I mean, even if KMT was elected in 2016, still Beijing would demand the kind of the addressing the common definitions of the 99 consensus of one China. And now Beijing definition is quite clear. Both mainland China and Taiwan belong one and the same China, one and the same state, one and the same countries. And this is a kind of definition that even KMT cannot accept. So I think the current dialogue, no doubt, that by narrowing down definitions of 99 consensus, it make virtually impossible for the cross-strait relations to continue. The question is why Beijing need to do so. I think there are some sort of, well, at least my own theories. I published an article in the Global Taiwan Institute about Nash equilibriums. I don't think the core piece is about just a convergence of the policies between Beijing and Taiwan. It's more about long-term strategy, convergence of long-term strategy between Beijing and Taiwan. So, for your reference, if you're interested, I'll mail you that article. The question is that the question I have is that why Beijing need to narrowing down this? Because it is because that domestic requirements that Xi Jinping need to narrow it down in order to show the toughness on Taiwan, or because that they have a more sensible strategy on this one. I would say that they may have some sensible strategy, because after 8 years of the interaction between the Ma Ying-jeou and Beijing, a lot of concessions and Taiwanese voters does not seem to buy this kind of concession, these kind of favors, and that kind of a positive frame, psychological frame, does not work. No, positive concession to Taiwan doesn't win hearts and minds of Taiwanese people. Then what can Beijing do? Beijing can do your negative frame right now. It's a negative frame that you have to make Taiwanese feel pain by by not accepting 1998 consensus or preconditions. And that kind of a pen cannot stop short of the Taiwanese tolerance. Now, if Taiwanese people say that, oh, aha, by not accepting 1998 consensus, you still can, we'll still live quite as happy as possible, then all the follow-up the agenda of cross-regulation will be set up by Taiwan. So I think this is the question that you find more hard line than soft line. Yes, you have the soft hands, softwares, and you have 31 majors. But I think more and more is that more aggressive, more hard line will be to show the Taiwanese people that that Beijing need to be assertive.
Okay, yeah, first of all.
Okay, I have a question for Dr. Walker. You talk about the Xi Jinping's foreign policy, statement, discourse. Evidently, it has become much more global-oriented and ambitious. I don't know to what extent that kind of foreign policy procurement declaration or discourse alarmed the Western world. Obviously, United States came to the conclusion, that she wants to replace the leadership of the United States in world affairs. As you can see from the recent two documents, national security strategy, national defense strategy, it raised to the level of competition between the two ideology, two social systems, or even, maybe, I don't know, maybe even two civilizations. This is alarming, to the world. I don't know whether, to what extent the European countries share their kind of judgment or their kind of understanding made by the United States. Okay, so this is, then I think that Sijing mentioned this narrowing down of the definition of 1992 consensus. I'm not so sure that is the case, because in a mainland publication, China never published, never publicly acknowledged the Yizhong Gebiao. It did not appear in any Chinese official documents or even articles that China accepted the Yizhong Gebiao when China two interpretations. So China just privately kind of did not oppose that kind of expression from the KMT side. So I think that Xinhua, you say that kind of regulation basically just as ask the publication not to mention this when China two interpretations, but just follow the original policy. I don't think it's something really new. So I have some doubt about this narrowing down of definition of 1992 consideration. It's never publicly accepted. So how can you say it's a narrowing down?
Can I add one sentence? Just one sentence. I think Beijing already said that no matter whatever you want to accept 1998 consensus is up to the Chinese government. But whatever expression you do, you have to make sure that the expression is compatible with so-called both China and mainland China and Taiwan belong to one and the same China, one and same China, one and same state， 体现一中原则，体现两岸同属一中的这种概念 principle. So I think this is precisely because Beijing made clear what does it mean of 1998 consensus, and as Taiwan side has said, that make it difficult for Taiwan or any party to accept.
This is actually a response to Dr. Walker, because you mentioned that a consolidation of Xi Jinping is actually not very big into Taiwan. Well, let's not be naive, and he's not going to be a lenient person. Only that a consolidation of Xi would be better than a transition to Xi. With Taiwan dropping the 1992 consensus, and with Xi already promising that the land will move and mountain shaken, of course, Xi is going to put a lot of pressure on Taiwan, including that narrowing down of the definition, including the fighter jets circling Taiwan, and so on and so forth. So all these things happen my argument is simply that if Xi Jinping is in a weak power position, how much greater the pressure would that be? Because he would himself under the pressure of the PLA generals. So that's the what I have been talking about. And I have to say a little bit about the development of this model. It got its insight basically from Taiwanese, because we all know that political leaders in Taiwan would have to strengthen their positions in domestic elections, and that is primary considerations. And I think it's only natural that the Chinese Communist Party leaders would also take their power positions as the most important thing for them, because for them to lose the political competition would entail much greater cost than the people in Taiwan. So I still think that this is a primary contribution. And I don't know whether Shi Qing has listened to my annual speech.
He was not there.
I'm extremely happy that we share a lot of common observations.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go to the next one. No response.
I can
Yeah,
answer.
or yeah, you want to address. You want to respond.
Okay, I think that there is less alarm in Europe because the relationship between the Europeans and China has not been seen in strategic terms. We never, we saw China as an economic partner and competitor, and as a possible partner on global issues like climate change, etc. But this military strategic dimension that the US-China relation always had is absent from the European Union. Actually, this is something that the US would like to be more considered by the Europeans. And you also see that there is quite a difference in the response to certain initiatives coming from China. A good example is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, where the US basically argued this is an initiative coming from China, hence it is evil by nature. I overdo it a little bit, but we will not endorse it, we will not participate, and we will even ask our allies not to sign up to this, because this is an effort to replace the international financial institutions with a China-led institution. The European response was completely different. It was not very coordinated, I admit, because the EU as such could not sign up. It was the individual EU member states that were asked to become founding members or not. But the calculation on the European side was, it would be, the European response was, it is better to be inside and try to shape the rules and the norms and the standards of this new institution from the inside than sort of downright reject it. And then you had the UK sort of, like they usually do, they forged ahead and signed up. And at least Italy, France, and Germany came up with a coordinated response and made a joint statement saying, we joined the bank as founding members, but this is what we expect. And then others followed. Strangely, of the 16 plus one, only one country became a founding member, which was Poland. So this is a good example of the European Union. I think the major difference is that for the US, the Asia Pacific was always the major focal point in the relationship between China and the US. For the Europeans, the region is strangely absent from their China policy for a very long time. It only came up. On the global level, the Europeans discovered, so to speak, China very early and saw it as a potential partner on issues like climate change or non-proliferation or other global issues, while the US ignored this global dimension in a way. And only recently under Obama, I would say, came around to see this global dimension of the relationship. So it's not even the sort of, Hugh White approach that we are willing to accommodate, because China was simply not seen as a strategic competitor in the military sense. But I think in the last 2 years, the mood has shifted somewhat, and it's triggered mainly by economic factors. The economic factors being the surprise about the degree of Chinese presence we see now within Europe itself. And also the course that China has been taking under Xi Jinping with shrinking spaces for civil society, with a trend to total control of the citizens, the internet, VPN, you name it, and bringing the party back in, which is also an economic concern, but also an ideological concern, that this effort to bring party cells into joint ventures, privately owned companies, etc. So the mood, there is a debate now in Europe. It's still not the sort of military dimension, but it's more the what will happen to our economic competitiveness. And the second is, what does this mean ideologically if China starts to really, the whole thought in China behind this new proactive foreign policy from my perspective is that it starts with the global financial crisis, when from the Chinese perspective, the West demonstrates that this model of capitalism does not work. And then it develops into a crisis of liberal democracies that are not able to deliver anymore. They see this in the US with the election of Donald Trump, but they also see this with Brexit and the rise of populism in other European countries. And so it's this conviction that the Chinese model is superior. It's very clear, and this is of course a major challenge to the Europeans and their norms and values, human rights, you name it, that they see a challenge there.
Okay. You want to respond?
Let me first respond to Jian Wei's remark that whether or not we narrow down really matters. I think it's true that Beijing has never, it never, in the past, it never denied Taipei's statement that the definition includes different interpretations, right? But of course, in Beijing's official canons in the past, whenever it mentions one China, then it says there's only one China, without the part of different interpretations. But now it's making a change. There's a flat denial, flat rejection. Though I think it's the first step, enunciated only by the Xinhua Museum, but not from the government, the PA. But this is reasonably, I guess, a first step to a further step, that Beijing would further, tone up its rejection of different interpretations. That's something that I think can be reasonably inferred for what will happen in the future. So that's my interpretation. And I pretty much agree with Feng's reasoning that Beijing, maybe actually in Tokyo, may have long, even before President Tsai was inaugurated, tried to really seize the definitive power for Chinese consensus, right? And I think it makes sense that Beijing may have try to make a new strategy. That I guess one of the most sort of serious outcomes for the 2016 presidential election is that there's almost remains no more available or feasible bargaining chip or tool to influence Taiwan's either government, especially public opinion, after the 80 years of Islamic changes. I think that's probably one of the most serious problems, not only for Beijing, but for cross-strait relations. Beijing sees no reason to continue with this relatively moderate tool by resorting to economic allures for Taiwan. Rather, it will see, the increasing appeal for hawkish policy like what we see in the past 2 years. So basically, I agree with you. That's it. Yeah.
Okay, any other comments? Please.
Just to complement this, I mean, Herman and I have been doing for 14 years meeting with the Chinese on EU-China and cross-strait relations. And I remember before Tsai Ing-wen was elected, in that year, the mood on the Chinese side was really a huge sense of frustration with Ma Ying-jeou, that he was not able to deliver despite all the good things that China had done, all the generous gestures that had come out from the mainland and all the incentives that were given to Taiwan, and yet the identity issue goes in the completely wrong direction. So of course, we read the public surveys, and they have a problem wrapping their head around that. And they were frustrated with Ma Ying-jeou because he was unable, I think the misunderstanding they have is the domestic political constraints that politicians who run for office have in Taiwan. That Ma Ying-jeou we saw what happened when he mentioned peace talks, when he ran for office the second time, and his approval rate plummeted, but they don't accept these limitations. They think if he's a strong leader, he should be able to, to deliver, and he's not. So I would agree with your interpretation that it's sort of a consequence of being frustrated about the more positive approach has not worked the way it should have, and so let's try something else.
Please.
I just would say that I think the stability of Beijing's policies, because that the Beijing's concession has been revealed only in a very timid way, which means that after 8 years of Mao's administration, Taiwanese people already say, by 1799 consensus, even define the country as area-to-area relations. What Taiwan can gain in international relations is only about ICAO and the WHA observerships. So this for Taiwanese, this concession is not really meaningful. I think the idea for the Beijing strategy is to make sure that Taiwanese people cannot see the ceilings of their concessions. But they already let Taiwanese people see the ceiling, so that's what they can do. No, by accepting 99 consensus, by defining the cross-strait relation as area-to-area relations, by denying that the cross-strait relation is not international relations, what you can get, what Ma can get, is only piece by piece, case by case international participations. And that makes Taiwanese people so frustrated.
And reversible.
And reversible. And also, the so-called economic concessions cannot trickle down into the average Taiwanese people. And you have a lot of brokers across the Taiwan Strait that try to block the kind of a cross-strait business. And that kind of concession is really not meaningful for Taiwanese people. And that makes Taiwanese people, when doing the election, feel that, okay, what the hell, let's change. Right? Let's change the government.
But just to your comments, the constraint of Beijing's policy towards Taiwan in terms of foreign policy is that the KMT cannot prove Beijing that the KMT, that the party, will sustain its power for a longer term. But what if, after 4 or 8 years, that the DPP comes up, and all the franchise that Beijing granted to the KMT will be succeeded by the DPP, and that's why. That's the
Yeah,
but that's the constraint.
Have a democracy. There is a change of government.
So they are very cautious.
I know
on
that.
this issue.
But
Yeah,
then
please.
it's still the same thing. So even if you just only give considered Taiwan for WHA's observerships and the CARE special guest, still it's revocable. You can reverse it. If you grant Taiwan across the board all kind of international participation, it still can reverse if PPP assume the office without acknowledging the 99 consensus, and that the stake is so high. So you created the stake is so high for the DPP not reverse the policies. But then if you only have 2 cases.
Yeah, please.
I follow to Dr. Webber's comment that I think it's true that even when Mali was still in power, Beijing has expressed its implications that you meaning mind you are trumpeting different territories only, without really mentioning one chapter. That was suggested by Beijing even at least 2 years before the term, before the end of the last term. And about the perception that Beijing perception that Ma failed to deliver. But I think Beijing still has a problematic understanding of the nature of Taiwan's political system, and how, to what extent can it really like CCP that it could really effectively influence public opinion. Just nobody would expect any leader, either it's the Wei Xijie and Ma Ying-jeou or Tsai Ing-wen, to really influence the structure, the basic dominant sort of public opinion tendency in Taiwan society. And I remember that it was I think it's 2009 that there was this high-ranking official from the Central Party School leading a big delegation to Taiwan. And one of the most important issues on their agenda is trying to push Taipei to move into political talks with Beijing. Only after 1 year, less than 2 years, of Beijing's sort of granting of economic favor to Taiwan. I mean, they are impatient. Okay, that's also one of the problems that is still on the part of China. Even though after so many years dealing with different administrations in Taipei, the very assertive and hardball DP administration of Chen Shui-bian, they managed administration, but they still do not really catch the gist of Taiwan's politics. That's sort of the lingering problem here.
Yes, please.
A short remark also relying on these 14 years of experience. I have the impression that what you on the Taiwanese side do not take into consideration in an, let's say, realistic degree is the groupthink on the Chinese side. In these conferences, as far as facts concerning Taiwan, which area of Taiwan society is concerned, we have nothing to tell them. They have all the information, but the framework of interpretation is a big difference, and they cannot cross one line. This is still a communist party, and all the members in the big think tanks are party members. So there is the correct interpretation of the situation by the leadership of the Communist Party. And this is incorporated in all the analysis of our Chinese colleagues. It was very revealing last year when we had the conference, we already talked about that. The conference started, unfortunately for the Chinese colleagues, 1 day before the start of the 19th Party Conference. 1 day before Xi Jinping was interpret the situation concerning Taiwan, which then could be factored in your own analysis as far as the basic framework is concerned. So we had 2 very respected elderly Chinese colleagues who, due to their good relations, had some ideas what Xi Jinping was going to say. So we had the first framework of how the situation in Taiwan, the relationship between China and Taiwan would be interpreted. And a lot of colleagues were quite obviously relieved. But on the other hand, at least I have the experience, I think you share it too, that the leeway of interpretation acceptable to the Chinese side from the European participants has narrowed. 3 years ago, for the first time, a member of one of the leading Chinese research institutes ask the question in the final discussion, why are the European colleagues continuously refusing to accept our interpretation of the situation in Taiwan, implying that they as Chinese understand better what's going on in the Chinese society than these foreigners. 2 years ago, a new category in judging our analysis was introduced. Are we pro-China or anti-China? And last year in Shanghai, basically our true faces were all revealed. We were all anti-China. So the problem is we can agree on a number of factual issues, but especially the relationship, the state-society relationship. On the Chinese side, there is still the perspective, the state guides society. And it's a mark of a true leader that he is able to impose his ideas, his concepts on society in China. And implicitly, the expectation, not on Tsai Ing-wen, but on Ma Ying-jeou, was that it would be the sign of a true leader in the case of Mao if he would have been able to impose his concept on Taiwanese society. That he was unable to do that showed that he was not a true leader. So regarding this relationship, state-society, all the Europeans all would argue, of course, there's a certain degree of independence as far as the state is concerned, but basically politicians have to take up social development. They have to react to changes, demands from society. This is an idea that they can accept it on, let's say, theoretical level, but that it's played out in day-to-day politics. They cannot accept openly. That's always, and always we get the interpretation that some devious people try to mislead the people on Taiwan, that there are differences in value and perception. It's not really factored in their analysis. So that makes it really problematic, and for them to identify certain points to be, let's say, more efficient in dealing with Taiwan. Because that is, they cannot cross a certain line. That's one of the major problems in our understanding.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I hate time limits. So that's why we escaped the coffee break. And now
Yeah, but we didn't have any coffee.
outside. So now, I would suggest that we turn to Xu Zhensi from the Zhonghua Institution of Economic Research. She will talk about Chinese Belt and Road Initiative and its implications on regional and cross-strait relations. Please.
Thank you very much. I'll follow Xi's report and also the discussion in 19th Congress. The Belt and Road Initiative is given a lot of attention in the 19th Congress, as the initiative is Xi's so far most important grand development strategy. And also it has been given a lot of highlight in the 19th Congress, according to the diplomatic achievements so far received in China. And you'll remember that in May last year in Hangzhou, the Belt and Road Summit, next year they are going to have the second summit. So we can observe how many leaders, how many national leaders are coming for the second summit, including any leaders from European Union. And the Belt and Road Initiative start with 50-some countries in Asia, crossing Asia to Europe. However, it is further open to Africa, for example, Middle East, for example, and also recently to Latin America. For example, our former friend Panama is also invited to take part in the Belt and Road Initiative. So the initiative started as a regional plan focusing in ASEAN. However, it's now becoming a more global initiative, and with membership coming from different parts of the country. And in the initiative, there are 5 routes. You may all know that the 5 routes connecting China with different parts of the world. And there are the intention is to build 6 international economic cooperation corridors. 经济走廊. This includes the new Euro-Asia land bridge, the China-Mongolia-Russian corridor, China Central Asia and West Asia corridor, and China Peninsula corridor, and the China Pakistan corridor, and the Bangladesh China India Myanmar, the BCIN corridor. Among these 6 corridors, for example, the Indo-China Peninsula corridor, and also the Bangladesh China India Myanmar corridor actually cover our major partners under Taiwan's New Southbound policy. And of course, there are various strategic objectives of the Belt and Road Initiative. Some are written, but some are not written. But we can gather from all kinds of documents and policy papers from China. So this include, of course, for example, to establish a new type of international relations between China and the covered country, and also to reinforce under the goal the thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. And China will also exercise major country diplomacy with Chinese characters, while aims to foster a new type of international relations with the Belt and Road covered country by building a community with a shared future for mankind. And there are some other strategic objectives. For example, China is committed to continuously open up its domestic market and promote economic upgrading and reform, and to attract foreign direct investment, technology and talents, to mitigate the impacts of aging in China and protect national economic security, and also to promote internationalization of the RMB. So the Belt and Road Initiative is actually one grand strategy that is to realize the Chinese stream, starting from Asia and then expanding to the other parts of the world. And of course, it has a broad geopolitical and economic agenda, and it has been received positively from quite a lot of countries. It has also received a lot of criticism. For example, it has been criticized for its use of massive financial assets to dominate smaller and poorer economies through long-term control of infrastructure through its ODA, the official aid program, and natural resources and associated land assets. And we complete a study last year to compare all these loans under Belt and Road Initiative for the target country, and we found that actually China did not offer that positive, that peripheral terms of credit. For example, most of the loans actually have interest rate as high as 7%, 8%, and shorter return periods. For example, for JICA, Japan's JICA's loan, usually JICA would provide less than 1% of interest rate and 40% of return period. But China's loans under the ODA mechanism is quite different. And responding to this, there have been a lot of criticism about this ODA. So you may notice that the recent development is China has announced that they will reform the ODA system. For example, they announced last year that they are going to establish a new organ, which is called 国际合作发展署, International Cooperation and Development Agency, directly report in the State Department, directly reported to the president. And the function is to have this main organ to replace 商务部, Ministry of Commerce, and also Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It will be a designer, a coordinator, and also implementing all the major ODA. So that is one very important progress while China implements its Belt and Road Initiative, and also a lot of this ODA mechanism. And I want to, and also, in addition to this criticism on this infrastructure and also this ODA, and there are, for example, quite a number of environmental disputes in a certain country like Myanmar, and also recently in Malaysia before its election. And they have been talking about China's infrastructure in Myanmar, in Malaysia have been caused a lot of environmental dispute. And you may also know that China, the Belt and Road Initiative didn't actually create a job opportunity because they always bring their own workers. And I think this is also under a review by Chinese government. So all this explains that China is going to show more flexibility to make the Belt and Road Initiative feasible. While we talk about the abolish term limits of Xi Jinping, so you may expect that because the initiative is Xi's own child, it's his brain product. So this Belt and Road Initiative will continue probably after 2022. So it will be a long-term. Strategy. So China has to show more flexibility in order to improve the mechanism and to have better performance. And I want to talk a bit about something that it has not been discussed a lot. And there are 5 5of this Belt and Road Initiative, this 5 connection or 5 communication, including the policy coordination, the infrastructure connectivity, the trade connectivity, and the 5th one is 民心相通. 民心相通 means connecting people's heart in this region to build kind of shared community census. And this is the major area for China's performance or implementation of the soft power diplomacy so far. And under this soft power diplomacy, where China wants to export its culture, the main vehicle is Confucius Institution. And however, the Confucius Institution has been received quite a lot of positive responses in certain countries, like in some Southeast Asian countries and also in South Asia. But in South Asian country, but you remember that last year, Australia was the first one to shoot fire at this Confucius Institute, and following by other countries in Europe, etc. And they also touch upon the internet, for example, the internet and China's influence through internet, and also buying and acquisition of a lot of local companies. So to respond to this, recently, it's very interesting because recently China has also announced that they are going to improve or diverse players performing the soft power diplomacy. It was a government agency and also a Confucius Institution before, and right now they want to encourage development of the non-governmental or non-profit organization to make it more a civil organization. And for this, actually, some of them have approached Taiwan because in China there are no Tzu Chi Foundation, for example. They have no effective Red Cross, etc. So for that kind of development of the non-profit, non-organization, and also charity organization, I think that is where that Taiwan and probably European countries can work together and share our experiences and help them. And so okay. So in terms of the implications in the region, China will continue to deepen its economic reform and enhance economic engagement with the covered countries in the region. And this has been committed by Xi's report that they are going to have, for example, the negative lease approach for FDI, foreign direct investment. Previously, this negative lease approach was only applied for a country that have FTA with China. For example, China-Korean FTA, they gave a negative lease approach. But in the future, they are going to open up and have all countries, either with or without FTA with China, to adopt by this negative lease approach, and also to have further more enhanced economic engagement with the region by, for example, China will negotiate new FTAs with FTAs with the country and upgrade the existing FTA. For example, they have quite a number of old FTA, the one with ASEAN, etc. They are going to update or upgrade the existing FTA to make it more liberalized and to make it more reflect of the current situation. And this also includes that China's participation, active participation in the RCEP is going to bring China further integrated into the regional economy. In November last year, ASEAN and Hong Kong signed the FTA, the ASEAN-Hong Kong FTA, and after 4 years of negotiation. And Hong Kong signed the FTA under a separate custom territory. So it is a separate FTA with China-ASEAN FTA. And the FTA will become effective January 1st, 2009 in Hong Kong, and at least 4 of ASEAN 10 members complete ratification. So you can imagine that with Hong Kong joining the region and also this mechanism, China will have greater influences in this region. And so all these messages sent to the region come in contrast with Trump, for example, American First policy. So I think most of the countries, whether they welcome China's infrastructure or not, they welcome China's further move to liberalize its economy and also to further integrate into the region. And however, in the meantime, the region will become more divided on their stance and policies towards China. For example, the South China Sea dispute may have something the common nature in the future, and this may lead to a failure of a certain regional cooperation mechanism. In that mechanisms, decision making is run by consensus, and also the region will become more divided as countries will compete. For example, the ODA resources, and also they will compete for investment from China. For example, they are all eager to become part of the industrial collaboration mechanisms with China, to invite more investment coming from China, as China is now relocating the overcapacity of some of the manufacturing facilities to the region. And as for the implication on cross-strait relation, profound implications on cross-strait relation. First of all, Taiwan's pursuit of negotiating FTA and also participating in the regional integration, and also enhance official ties with major trading partners in the region will face more difficulty. And because of China's greater influence and tougher cross-strait relations. Secondly, attracted by China's domestic markets and more liberalized, for example, trade and investment regime, Taiwan will see more investment outflows to China. and also more investment outflows to a region following business opportunities coming from Belt and Road Initiative. For example, since last year, our investment pattern and also structure of our investment into China has changed gradually. Previously was labor-intensive industry, but starting from last year, we see more and more very high tech, large globalized companies start to move to China. For example, the Taijidian, the TSMC, and also Shangyin. Shangyin is a very worldly well-known company for producing very high quality equipment. So all these kind of large companies are now, Foxconn also announced that they are going to expand their operation, and also Xu Shengxiong is the former chairman of our Confederation of Industry. So all these large companies, they are now setting foot in China. Targeting at the future industry, for example, the health, the smart city, the smart healthcare, and all these kind of sectors that is totally different from our previous investment in China. And thirdly, I understand that one task for Guotaiban this year is to support and encourage more Taiwanese companies to take part in the Belt and Road Initiative. So as they become more and more encouraging, and more Taiwanese companies will show interest and try to take part in the Belt and Road Initiative. And this will definitely weaken President Tsai's cross-trade policy as well as domestic economic policy, for example, the new southbound policy. And I agree with Professor Xu that the new southbound policy is actually a more political-driven policy than economic-driven policy. And so far, it has been very much welcomed by local companies, but most of these local companies are smaller size, or those are companies that have not have large investment in China. But for large companies that have investment in China, most of these companies have been very, very quiet. So if this company begin to show interest or try to take part in the Belt and Road Initiative, we may see more divided Taiwan society in terms of supporting President Tsai's policy versus following China's economic dominance. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For the One Belt, One Road initiative. And next one is Guo Chongwen. He's the only journalist in this conference, and he works for the United Daily News for, I would say, 3 decades, very, very long time. And he will talk about Guobatis, that means where to go. Taiwan between assertive China and defensive United States. And but this time we'll have to be punctual because the Secretary General of the Foreign Affairs is already waiting outside, and he will also give us a keynote speech. Yeah. So you have 15 minutes, and then the Wang Jianwei and Hart Eisen, you will speak after the lunch. Yeah. And then we can start our discussion in the next session. Okay. Thank you. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I'm trained as a political scientist, but I end up working as a journalist for over 28 years. The topic I'm going to talk about is try to bring the American factor in the cross relations, and especially how the bilateral relations between the United States and China had really had impact on Taiwan relations with China. At the end, I'll talk about Taiwan Travel Act. That is the latest thing happening. To begin with, this is my general argument, meaning that the U.S. has been taking a very confrontational approach with China these days, mostly in economic and trade issues, but that will spill over to security issues as well. And the U.S. would do whatever means possible, that include the Taiwan issue, to make China yield to its demands. While China domestic politics had transformed into such a way to a one-man rule, with whose bottom line legitimacy is preventing Taiwan from secession. And caught in between would be the Taiwan issue. I think that will be very sensitive and heated in the next decade. In order to, the assertive China is the first section I want to raise, is that this, to resolve the Taiwan issue, is the most important and crucial part of this Chinese dream. It's not a big issue, but it requires the full attention of the leadership, because it's the legitimacy of the whole political succession process. And I think you have seen that in the past People's Congress as well as the Party Congress, Taiwan issue had been very prominent in all the speeches. And the legitimacy of the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, and its leadership hinges on the progress or setback of this mission of China Dream. And China Dream, within the China Dream, that Taiwan issue is the most important. And if it's necessary, that it needs to overhaul the traditional passive policy that China had been taking. This is Xi Jinping got his trinity of party, military, and state. Official reason is that it has to keep those terms together. But Xi's push for this constitutional change is not doing that without opposition. We know that something is very curious happening during between the second Central Party general meeting and the third one, that somehow people have suspected that terminating the term limit of the state presidency haven't been get passed on the second meeting. So that's the reason why they suddenly announced that they have decided to make the constitution change right before the third central committee. But by abolishing this kind of term limit, I think Xi would generate a great resentment within the CCP. Xi would have to justify himself why he want to do it and what is the justification of his getting a third or even a fourth term. For instance, he had to unify China by the year 2025. That's over his second term. Or because there's such outside foreign challenges facing China. And we've seen that over the past 2 years already, there seems to be a new push for trying to influencing Taiwan, either by a threat of military force or through economic interdependence or using the one country, two system. But so far, it haven't been really working. And you are facing more and more reaction coming from Taiwan society. I think the election of Tsai Ing-wen is one of the symptoms. And also we are seeing sunflower movement and all that. She had very strong words at the end of the party, in his speech at the end of the People Party Congress, saying that Taiwan will face a punishment of history for any attempt at separatism. And at the end, he said, every inch of our great motherland's territory cannot and will not be separated from China. I would say that Taiwan issue now will be a threat to the legitimacy of Xi's tenure. Xi will be very vulnerable politically if he's not taking action when Taiwan or the US stepping on the red line of one China principle. She will be even facing a dilemma. Either you will have to face a domestic revolt or running a risk of escalating conflict with Taiwan or China. But I would say that no Taiwan president would dare to challenge China in the sense. But what really constitutes the fatal challenge for Xi is the change of US one China policy. And that comes to the second part. It's about how defensive US has been. As we know that everyone is having the sense that US is on the way to decline and China is on the way to rise. And this kind of things, although China had surpassed US is feeling the pressure, had to compete with China. I think Trump administration is the most obvious one, and putting a lot of economic and trade sanction as we are seeing right now. And the US is not really competing from a strong position, rather it's competing from a weak position. I think the most effective leverage that the Trump had found is the Taiwan policy. That because Washington knew that is the most crucial part for President Xi and CCP. On trade and economics, we are seeing there's over the past 2 weeks, we are seeing two fronts. One is President Trump tried to levy special tariff on steel and aluminum. But the thing is, he's making that on national security ground. And he said that any country who wants to be excused from this special tariff can come to talk with the United States. So we are seeing all the trade representatives are in Washington right now. This, within the agreement they are reaching, according to Bloomberg reports, there's one saying that you have to help us in pushing back against Chinese trade policies. And that is quite important because in that way, China, United States can ally all those people turning against Chinese. And on just, I think yesterday, Trump had announced they're going to impose a tariff on as many as 60 billion worth of Chinese goods. And Chinese, of course, retaliate against this right away. On security, we are also seeing that, as Professor Wang had mentioned, there are several national security strategy, national defense strategy have been published against this. I want to call to your attention, especially on the South China Sea. I think that will be the next hot point in terms of security competition. Only yesterday, China announced because one of the US destroyer had entered into its neighboring water. They're conducting the so-called freedom of navigation operation. So the China is going to have a naval drone within the South China Sea. That is unprecedented. I think this is not a coincidence happening on the same day when President Trump wanted to announce there's a tariff on Chinese imports. And the US will have to demonstrate that it can really defend it against China because all the regional governments have been watching this and try to hinge on their bets. And I think the Korean Peninsula issue had really decreases the Chinese leverage in this field because they are starting to have a summit sometime at the end of May. So China has been effectively marginalized from the whole peace crisis-solving mechanisms. And I think one of the things that caught our attention, especially for Donald Trump, is that among all the leverages, I think the U-turn of the One China policy is probably the most important one. Right after Donald Trump get elected, he had successfully provoked China by having a telephone call with Tsai Ing-wen. And Donald Trump keep flirting the idea that the question whether he should follow the traditional U.S. One China policy. He said, I don't have to apply that kind of traditional policy. But you are seeing there's a big U-turn afterward. China have been doing whatever they can, try to arrange a summit as soon as possible. So in April, they have a summit in Mar-a-Lago. And Trump, again, pledges that he's going to uphold the One China policy. Why this meeting is that important, and also the subsequent Donald Trump's visit of Beijing, is because that's before the 19th Party Congress. For Xi to demonstrate that he can handle the Taiwan issue, especially when the US have been changing its One China policy, that is crucial for his legitimacy as well as his leadership in the whole affairs. This is, we can skip that, the difference between One China principle by China and what Washington call One China policy. There's a genuine difference between them. And we are seeing that after Donald Trump pledges, there's still some confusion happening in the Taiwan policy. For instance, the U.S. had been tried to keep the commitment on Taiwan, but on the other hand, like the State Department webpage, the flag had been taken down and so on and so forth. So some people are calling that we should really need the Taiwan policy review of that. But that's exactly what Donald Trump had been hoping for. This kind of confusion and contradictory is the tool that he tried to use to have leverage on China. And the last part I'm talking will be Taiwan Travel Act and Taiwan as a useful leverage card for America. So far, under the One China policy of the United States, there is 5 high-level officials cannot visit Washington, D.C. The president, the vice president, the premier, the foreign, and the defense minister. And so far, the Taiwan Travel Act had called officials at all levels, they can travel to Washington, D.C. And this, Donald Trump has signed the legislation into law after both House and the Senate passed the act by unanimous consent. There is speculation that Donald Trump may not sign it and let legislation just become law like that, in order to show there's still some reservation from the administration. But rather, he's not doing that, he actually signed it. I think that's quite a symbolic move. And some people also argue that it's not legally binding. I would say that that is not really to the point. I think now with the Taiwan Travel Act, that Donald Trump is having a very effective leverage in his hands. Right after that, we are seeing 2 deputy assistant secretaries from the states and from Commerce departments have visited Taiwan. And there is also rumors saying that in May, there's a defense industry forum held in Kaohsiung, as well as in June, the new AIT building is going to have a grand opening, that the US will send even higher level officials to attend those sessions. I think that is the pressure that the US have been effectively put on China these days. What would be the implication for Taiwan? some people would argue that it would be wise for President Tsai, to resist the temptation to accept the change just now. Meaning that if Taiwan had the chance or the opportunity to break the policy taboo and visit Washington, D.C., she should refrain and consider what would be the impact it will have on cross-strait relations. And do not try to let Taiwan to become a leverage in Washington's struggle with Beijing. I think President Tsai had learned the lesson after the call. As President Xu had mentioned, that Taiwan has suffered from two diplomatic recognized countries afterward. And you have been unable to attend WHA as observation status. And this is really putting a blow on Taiwan. If that kind of thing repeat again, I think that will have tremendous political consequences for the local elections. Sorry. In concluding, I would say that the rising and assertive China with its legitimacy is resting on one China and Taiwan issue. So that is very important both for Xi and for CCP. While the declining and defensive United States is hoping and to flirt with Taiwan issue and gain leverage in its negotiation with China. But the third, I think what Taiwan had been in a pretty bad position is that there's a structural constraint on Taiwan, meaning that so far there's not been able to build up connection or channel communication with China. I think by losing, without that kind of connection, that would make Taiwan more easy to dependent on the US and more easy to become a leverage for Donald Trump in order to deal with China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guo Songren, for your very specific and very interesting analysis and statements on the role of Taiwan between the two big powers. Now I would suggest that you keep your questions in mind, and all of us, we move to the second floor. We are now in the third floor, just one floor downwards, because the Secretary General of the Foreign Ministry is already waiting for us. And we will have discussion after the next section, after our lunch. Okay? Thank you.
So we meet again at 2:30.